Good evening. Welcome to the Finance and Operations and Education and Pupil Services Committee meetings for March 26, 2020. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we begin, we'll do something fun. We'd like to wish a very special happy birthday to our Vice President, Ms. Rachel Mitchell. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
During this unprecedented time, while schools are closed and social distancing requirements are in place, the Upper Darby School District needs to continue certain aspects of its business, which includes decisions concerning pandemic planning. For this reason, Upper Darby School District will continue regularly scheduled school board meetings while Governor Wolf's emergency declaration is in place. It is the plan of the school board to hold these meetings with the minimum required departures from normal operating procedures. The Upper Darby School District School Board COVID-19 Special Operating Procedures document outlines expected departures from those normal operating procedures and the policy justification for such departures. At the start of each board meeting held during the emergency declaration, the board will review the departures from normal operating procedures as well as their justifications. While schools are closed and social distancing requirements are in place, the Upper Darby School District School Board finds it necessary to hold virtual school board and school board committee meetings to complete required business. These virtual meetings will allow for public viewing and participation. Following practices already in place for regular meetings, all virtual school board meetings, in addition to allowing near real-time public viewing and participation, will be recorded and the recordings made available after the meeting. In order to hold virtual school board meetings, adjustments need to be made following existing board policy. These adjustments have been outlined in the Upper Darby School District School Board COVID-19 Special Operating Procedures. Dr. McGarry.
Yes, Board President Brown, thank you very much. As a school district, we have made every effort to continue to hold our meetings with the public as close to what we would normally hold if we were here in person together. As a result, we are providing 2 opportunities for public participation during our committee meetings this evening. The way to send a question or a comment via email is to committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org. Again, committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org. Please state your name and address and tell us which agenda item you'd like to comment or question. Each comment or question will be taken before the board proceeds to the next committee meeting. If you'd like to phone in a message, please do so at 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Again, 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Your message should include your name, address, and the agenda item you'd like to comment on or ask a question. That voice message will then be directed to our email, committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org, and we'll be sure to address your comment or question in the order that they are received prior to the board moving on from one committee meeting to another committee meeting. I'll update the public on this throughout the evening, but again, committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org, or please call in at 610-789-720, extension 2000. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. The meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee will please come to order. Roll call, please, Mr. Rogers.
As I call each board member's name, please state that you are present and can hear the proceeding. Dr. Haig?
I'm present and I can hear the proceeding.
Mr. Desnoyers?
I am present and I can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Warsavage?
I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Neal?
This is David Neal. I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Ms. Dawes?
Present.
Mr. Fields?
I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Ms. Curry,
Good evening. I am present and I can hear the proceedings.
Ms. Mitchell,
Hello, everyone. I am present and I can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Brown.
Present. Policy 003 allows the board to suspend policies or parts of policies when appropriate. Therefore, due to the current ongoing crisis and the governor's closure order, I make the following motions to suspend language in 2 of the board's policies until the next regularly scheduled meeting. Policy 006.1, which regulates attendance at meetings via electronic communications, I move to suspend the language requiring board members to be present. Specifically, the language would be, a majority of board members shall be physically present at a board meeting when a board member attends through electronic communications. And Policy 006, which governs other requirements of board meetings, I move the suspension of language requiring that those members of the public wishing to participate be present. Specifically, the language in the section titled Public Participation would remove the words that reads, present at a board meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Does anyone abstain? Motion carries. Mr. Rogers, please begin with an overview of your agenda items for this evening, sir.
Tonight we have 5 agenda items. The first agenda item is a COVID-19 preparedness update. This is informational. District administration will provide an update on the research that we produced surrounding COVID-19 preparedness and also the CDC guidelines associated with it. Number 2 is an online school tax payment option, which will require board action. We'll review the potential of allowing online tax payments moving forward. Number 3 is the administration building relocation, which is also board action. The district administration will discuss all past options that have been considered for the district relocation out of the Aronimink Elementary School and propose the option at hand. Number 4 is a 2020-2021 budget update. This is informational. The district's administration will provide an update on the budget and any new information that's been provided to us at this time. Number 5 is policies, which will require board action. There are 4 policies tonight. 335, family and medical leaves. 626, federal fiscal compliance. 810.1, drug and alcohol testing for covered drivers. And 904, public attendance at school events.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Please begin with your first agenda item.
So as I previously stated, first up is the COVID-19 preparedness update. And the presentation will be given by Marvin Lee.
Thank you, Craig. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go. The outbreak of COVID-19 dramatically complicated how we operate our schools. So the Upper Dhabi School District simply does not have enough space to maintain social distancing in our schools and on our buses. The business office has been gathering information from multiple sources, test different feasibilities, and even renegotiating vendor contracts to provide safe and healthy school opening. This evening, we will present our findings, but please be aware that our final plan will change based on the official guidelines from the PA Department of Education when they become available. CDC, Center for Disease Control and Prevention, provides guidelines in maintaining healthy school environment in 8 different categories. Our presentation tonight will discuss how we are preparing our schools based on the CDC guidelines. The CDC guidelines were last updated on May 19th, last week. Can you go to the next page?
Yes.
So if you look at the slide on the left-hand side, those are the 8 different categories from the CDC. It starts with the cleaning and disinfection. One of the items that became very popular with the COVID-19 is the electrostatic spraying. Our maintenance manager, transportation supervisor, and I had an opportunity to have a live product demo of electrostatic spraying about 2 weeks ago, and we were impressed, and we decided to use the electrostatic spraying in our schools going forward. As you can see in the pictures, electrostatic spraying equipment provides much greater coverage than conventional trigger or pump sprays. In the new school year and in the future years, the electrostatic spraying will be an important part of our cleaning operations. In the next slide, we'll talk about how we will apply electrostatic spraying in our schools. So how are we going to do it? Next page, please. So we already changed the cleaning contract to make sure that we can apply electrostatic spraying. In the new school year and beyond, the cleaning contractors will electrostatic spraying all spaces on a daily basis during the flu season and when we ask them to provide additional services. So between December and February, we will disinfect all spaces with electrostatic spraying, and when we find a student who had a cold or flu, we will go ahead and ask the companies to provide additional electrostatic spraying. School district will provide equipment and chemical supplies. The equipment and supplies are quite costly, but the cost of the unit and supplies will be funded through the federal FEMA grant. If you look at the chart on the right-hand side, the new contract with the new responsibilities are starting at 10 schools, from Aronimink to Beverly Hills. The contracts with the 4 schools are not ending until next year, but our procurement office negotiated a term without any additional cost. I just wanted to thank Joe from our procurement office for making it happen. And I also would like to thank our contractors for agreeing with the terms at no additional cost. Just for your information, so we were approached by a private company and that provides electrostatic spraying services, and their quote was 4.5 cents per square foot, which is approximately $67,000 each time that we treat the entire school district. But in the new contract, we will be able to do from December through February at no additional cost. And to me, it was a big deal. And we will also make sure that we purchase the items, the units that are approved by the EPA to kill the virus. Next page, please. Cleaning and disinfection of our school buses. Before the school closure in mid-March, our bus drivers were disinfecting our buses with wipes, and we plan to do the same practice when the schools open up. We would love to apply electrostatic spraying in our buses, but will not be practical until we have a battery-operated units available in the market. Our electrostatic sprays are pretty heavy. They're about 50 pounds. And in the new school year, our school bus drivers and attendants will wear masks and gloves. And depending on the CDC and PD guidelines, transportation may send letters to families to ensure students wear masks before they get on the bus. It is also important to maintain social distancing when they are waiting for the bus at the bus stops. We also plan to have hand sanitizers and disposable masks available for students on the bus. Next item is the new cleaning chemicals. The business office is also working on introducing new chemicals lines and soap dispensers for all our schools. I am especially excited about the new hand soap dispenser because the new unit is designed to minimize the contamination of the soap itself. It's a cartridge-based product, not a pour-in product. It will be hospital-grade antibacterial hand soap in all our schools, and a comprehensive training will be given to facilities employees and cleaning contractors. Next page, please. Not sharing object is a common sense initiative, but still an important point. So we should discourage our students to sharing items with other students. We should also keep our students' belongings separated from each other. Partnership among parents, teachers, and principal will be an important part to enforce the rule. Ventilation. The CDC recommends that we bring in more outside airs into our buildings. Fortunately, Upper Dhabi School District has a central control system to control all air handling units. All the dampers are usually open at about 10%, but we can certainly centrally adjust the dampers to bring more outside air into our buildings. Water system, another common sense item. We'd like to get the message out to parents and the schools to minimize use and touching of water fountains and potentially ask students to bring in their own bottles, water bottles. Modify layouts. In the modify layout section, we'll discuss how we will maintain social distancing in our classroom and in our buses. If you look at the diagram, each student will have a personal space of approximately 36 square feet. That's 6 feet by 6 feet. For our calculation, we also assume 250 square feet for each teacher. Next page, please. So we actually went into the classrooms to see how social distancing will impact the classroom layouts. Normally, room 103 in Ronamink can hold 18 seats, but with social distancing of 6 feet, we can only place 9 seats in that same classroom. So we would like to look at how it's going to impact the entire school district. Next page, please. So if you look at the chart, you see the school name, the current number of students, the new number of students with the social distancing, and the capacity. For example, Charles Kelly has 355 students, but if we lay out the classroom with 6 feet apart, we can only hold 107 students, which is 30% of the original capacity. Another example, Upper Dhabi High School. We have 3,829 students. With the new social distancing measures, we can only hold 1,267 students, which is about 33% of the original capacity. School district-wide, we have 12,378 students in May of 2020, but with social distancing, we can only hold 4,719 students at the same time. That is 38% capacity. These figures will force conversations around virtual school, alternating attendances, AM and PM options, and etc. One more important note, special education spaces will likely require more spaces, which will likely reduce the capacity even more. How about the school buses? Next page. To maintain social distancing on our buses, we will have to assign one student in every 2 benches to create safe distance between students. If you look at the numbers in red, the distance between the student in front and the 2 seats back is only 4.7 feet, but we hope we can work with this layout because our buses have a high seat, which creates barriers. What does it mean to the entire school district? Next page, please. So our Transportation Department reviewed each school bus route in vehicle capacity and the student ridership. There are 71 buses that are serving Upper Dhabi schools, not counting charters and non-pub schools. If we plan to transport 100% of the normal ridership to all schools, which is approximately 4,800 students, we will require additional 208 buses. But it gets very complicated. First of all, we don't have enough time. It requires at least 6 months to order and receive the buses. And it comes with a huge price tag of $20 million. And also we have no space to park. We have no drivers. And also we have no use of those buses after the pandemic is over. Even if we transport all those students, we do not have space in our schools to educate them while maintaining social distance. Next page, please. Physical barriers in communal spaces, another common sense item, but another important point. We would like to have physical barriers when it's difficult to maintain 6 feet apart, such as receptionist desk. We may provide physical guides to create one-way route in the hallways in the schools, and we encourage staggered use of common spaces, such as playground. Next page, please. Final guidelines to food services. CDC recommends 3 things in food services: prepackaged meals, consumption in classroom, and using disposable items. Sounds very simple, but it is complicated if your job is to feed thousands of students at the same time. So, we're still gathering information from different sources and testing feasibilities of different options. We're looking forward to receiving additional guidelines from the PA Department of Education. Maybe PDE will mandate students to wear masks. We don't know. Maybe PDE will mandate thermal camera in each school to check each student's temperatures. We don't know. We're working with a lot of uncertainties, but we'll make sure to quickly adapt to new guidelines when they become available. Thank you for your time, and at this time, I'll take your questions.
Mr. Lee, this is Ed Brown. I just have a quick question. I think I know the answer, but I just want to confirm it. The required number of buses based on social distancing, you had 249, but that's based on if 100% of the kids came to school that currently uses the 71 buses. Is that correct? That doesn't take into consideration if we do a staggered schedule where we would need less additional buses. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the board?
This is Dr. Hegg. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question, and so I also wanted to ask about what Ed was asking about. Do we have any preliminary numbers on how many buses we would need with social distancing if we were operating at closer to that 38% capacity that we talked about for social distancing within the classroom?
We don't have those numbers yet, but that's something that we have to work on to get.
And
Sure.
Dr. Haig, I also just want to add to that, because Marvin and I have talked about this at nauseam, it feels. What becomes even more complicated is not knowing the constraints we're working with. So without knowing how we're going to fit 38% of student population in each building, it's hard to design transportation routes surrounding that. So the constraints intertwine with each other. But if you did it strictly off transportation, you could really create somewhat of an inequity across the district in the sense that we have two elementary schools, one outside of the community, who 100% of the students are transported by our buses. So if I say we can only fit 13 students on each bus, and I'm going to that school, it's a lot different than a school that has a better or a higher rate of walkers or parents driving them to school, because you'd have to allocate the entire population of that school on the lesser number of buses. So the inequity from that perspective, from those two buildings versus the other elementary schools, create a very complicated task to come up with how many students can we bus with our current fleet in total versus just two specific schools. So we are working through that, and I think as we get more guidance and find out what our options really are going to be come the fall, we'll be able to pull out that information.
Just a related question based on Dr. Haig's comment. Let's just assume you work it out, as far as the number of kids going to each school and taking the buses based on social distancing to 38%. And let's say the number goes from 249 to, 50. Is there a use for those buses, or would one bus be beyond 71 be a waste and we wouldn't know what to do with it? Or is there a certain threshold where we could say we could use those additional 40 for some other reason, or would we not be able to utilize any of the additional buses?
So I think that, and we've talked about this in the past, and just like we have an issue with space to educate students, regardless of COVID-19, we have a space issue. Along with that, we also have a space issue at our transportation center, which you'll see in a later presentation of how that lays out. Currently, we can't even fit our drivers' personal vehicles on site because there are so many buses there that we're out of parking. We have employees parking in surrounding neighborhoods just to get to work. And even if you could buy the buses and you could physically afford it, there's no space. So, even if you're talking about adding 10 buses, there's not enough room on site to be able to park those. So we could get creative, but you can see the price tag at $95,000 per bus. To be able to buy something is almost as if it's a disposable item. When this ends, you will not have the need for the bus, and you could build in, like going through our fleet, the older ones you could retire at that point and still have the new bus, but it would still create some complications.
Understood. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, this is Dr. Haig again. I wanted to ask about the soap. I heard Mr. Lee say that we're getting antibacterial soap, hospital-grade antibacterial soap, but as I understand it, the antibacterial soap is not more effective. It's certainly not effective against a virus, which is, of course, not a bacteria. And there are a lot of problems with antibacterial soap, including that they may lead to antibiotic-resistant bacteria, that they create environmental problems, that they maybe have endocrine disruptors. is there a particular reason that we think it's important to use antibacterial soap? Because my understanding is really that the FDA and other groups have sort of backed down on that and said we really should go back to using plain soap because antibacterial soap is not better.
Dr. Hegg, I'm going to have to get back to you on that because I don't have enough knowledge about the soap to give you intelligent answer, unfortunately. So I'm gonna have to get back to you on that.
Fair enough. I just want to put that out there that my understanding is it's not better, and there are many ways in which it's worse or potentially worse. So maybe we can reconsider that part. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Dr. Haig. I think Mr. Neal has a question or comment.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you, Marvin, for putting this together. The buses said they are disinfected daily, and I was wondering, are they actually disinfected between the routes or just after the school day?
They're doing it between the routes. So after the morning run, they're disinfecting the buses.
But like in between like the high school and the elementary route, or just after the morning and then after the afternoon?
After the morning run.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Gina, Mrs. Curry.
Good afternoon. Good evening. I just have a question regarding the soap. I know that the soap dispensers, I wasn't able to see the soap dispenser on the screen. I don't know if it was shown, but I just wanted to know what the plan was to make sure that the soap is fully, replenished. I know sometimes there's been issues in, with soap replenishment. So I just want to make sure, because we can't have any, mishaps with soap not being replenished. And, just the fact that that needs to be a regular practice. I know Dr. Hegg talked about the antibacterial, but I also know that there are some allergies to antibacterial soaps as well. So I wanted to ask that. And I also wanted to find out about the feeding, Marvin. I know that you shared that there is a plan about, how the feeding will happen. Is it going to be allowed for children to bring in their own lunches, or is it just going to be feeding through the lunch program? Thank you.
So the first question about the soap dispensers. So the procurement office, facilities management, the business office, we are going through a very comprehensive process to replace the soap dispensers in the entire school district, so we can provide the best product, and we can also standardize all the units in the entire school district. One of the things that we are also doing is that we are making the ordering process much simpler for our custodians. In the past, there was like a paper process that we have to go through. However, our custodians will be able to order those much simpler, almost like an Amazon.com type of transactions. So we expect the fill rate of the soap and the soap dispenser will be much better in the future years. CDC does recommend like bringing their own lunch, but I didn't mention that because we are 100% the meal provided the school district. So
Okay,
yeah, so
thank
the CDC does mention that.
Thank you, Mr. Liu. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
I do, Mr. Board President Brown. if you
Sure,
may.
Dr. McGarry.
Just a couple of reminders to those viewing in the public. On the board docs, this presentation on the right-hand side says this is I guess a draft plan. It's not the actual plan for the school district. So I just want to pause to those that are viewing in their homes or somewhere else watching this presentation virtually this evening. What we are attempting to do here, and I want to say to Marvin and to Craig Rogers, I appreciate the effort. A lot of time went into this. I tasked Marvin, Craig, Joe McGilvery, and their team to come back to me with at least a first look at what we have to consider if we were to do some kind of a hybrid learning opportunity where some students can at least come into the building if we're practicing social distance. At this time, even if we are to go green, even if the county goes green, the school district will still be forced to practice some type of social distancing plan when schools resume. So I do want to be clear that this is a first step, and I believe to Mr. Brown's question earlier, Board President Brown's question about the buses. Yes, obviously, it's a good question. Would there be a break-even point? And I think Craig was answering that, obviously we'd have to consider what we could replenish. The reality for us will be, what can we afford to do without as we go to balance this budget? So $95,000 for a bus is more than we pay most teachers in the school district. I think Mr. Brown was pointing that out, that what is the break-even point just to get through this window of time is an expense. Not to mention that our priority right now is that, as we pointed out in this presentation, is to improve our virtual learning opportunity plan that we put into place, the educational opportunities plan that we put in place quickly this school year. So right now, our number one priority is to improve the online instruction we're providing if we're to be in that environment next year. Regardless, even if we're green, according to the latest update from PDE and from the CDC, we still will have to have some kind of social distancing plan up and running, even if we're green as a school district or as a county. With that said, we still will have to have a robust virtual online learning platform. So we are working, and thankfully the board and the public allowed us to change our calendar. We are providing professional development to our teachers to make sure we have a better online learning opportunity as we go in the next school year, regardless of being in person. This plan, however, is the first step to allow us to look at, if you go back to one of the screens that shows the different schools, Craig. So one example would be on a kindergarten. Now we know that practicing 6 feet of social distancing in a classroom and how many kids we can get on a bus, we can now begin to plan how many days of the week can we rotate through bringing students in, days of the week. We're also going to look at, okay, kindergarten might come in obviously different than 1st through 5th grade, but 1st through 5th grade at Westbrook Park, we may rotate on a Monday and Tuesday to try to equal this out so that every elementary school student, because that will be our priority, on an hourly or every 2 hours, rotating kids and bringing them in so that our students are coming in staggered throughout the week, one day with catching up on schoolwork and providing training to our staff. The rest of the week staggering either every 2 hours or hour, students coming in and being live in person, and then rotating that out over the 180-day school year next year. That would be the consideration. What we had to first do is look at, okay, what does social distancing look on the bus? What does social distancing look in the classroom? And how many kids can we fit in on a time? We're going to take this data and come back and provide an even more option. One of the things I'm going to consider doing with board president and the board's opportunity, in a non-board meeting, committee meeting, do a community forum, virtual community forum, and kick around a couple different options and see what the public feels like as we get to next school year works best. Obviously, it won't be easy for everyone, but our game plan just after tonight's presentation is to focus kindergarten, maybe up until 6th grade, trying to bring our younger students in more so than not based on the data that we have right here as a first look. So this is not the final plan. This is the first step of many steps to try to get this right, if we're able to bring students and staff in person. The next thing we're working on is how many of our students and parents will feel comfortable returning to in-person instruction. We're probably going to put a survey out in the next month or so, and then trying to find out from our staff how much of our staff feels comfortable coming back in person. So there's a couple more steps of data collection that we're going to have before we finalize this. But I do want to make it clear to the public, this is just a draft and not a final plan. It's just consideration of what we're looking at to try to pull this off next school year. Even if we're green, even if the county moves to green, we're still going to have to practice some social distancing and provide a flexible, hybrid, virtual learning opportunity for all of our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Were there any other comments or questions from the board? Leah. Mr.
Good evening. Marvin, thank you so much for putting this together. I know it's at the top of most parents' concerns about addressing the upcoming school year. Very thorough plan, and I appreciate even the guidance letting us know that this is based on CDC recommendations and what this looks like from a financial impact to our school district. So as Dr. McGarry talks about the next phase of the plan, my question is, how do we look at areas where kids can't isolate, or areas that would probably need to be cleaned on a more frequent basis, not maybe just once a day, like locker rooms and bathroom facilities? How do we have physical education or sports? And also, my final concern is, or opportunity, can we look at contracting transportation? I know there's a lot of transportation opportunities that are provided through aftercare, things like that. I'm sure that'll be in the up and coming revision of this plan, but just wanting to put out there some of the parental concerns around physical education and sports, shared locker room spaces, and cleaning of that, and trying to avoid sharing equipment. So we talked about that in the classroom, but what does that look like when we're talking about a basketball, a baseball, things of that sort? So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Dawes. Dr. McGarry, looks like you're chomping at the bit to jump in and answer that.
Yeah, awesome questions. And I think physical education in the building, we're going to have to do that based on the social distance and provide cleaning and training to the health and physical education teachers to pull that off. From a PIAA standpoint, every time we get an update from the PIAA, we post it on the website. We are still looking for guidance as far as sports are concerned. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on where you live, that's opening up in areas at different times. So as we are probably opening up later than some counties, Leah, one of the things Ms. Dawes will do is we'll look at how other states and other counties are handling those very topics. I know there's a task force, and we're looking to get information locally from the county as well as from the state. We have yet to hear that information from the state. Hopefully they'll provide us guidance. An important point, I know I provided this to the board, and I know many of the board members are aware of this, and the public may not be. I know our music program is. One of the key areas to consider is our choral programs. That one of the issues that's come out is that the large number of students singing together and performing together is really not allowable under the current CDC guidelines, even if students were to wear a mask. So there's a couple different things that we're trying to navigate, sports and as well as the arts. And as we get more information closer to that, we'll obviously provide that update and take that into consideration. But very good point related to locker rooms, sports, and music, how we can do that. As far as interscholastic sports are concerned, there is a task force, and our very own former athletic director, Mrs. Holly Farnese, sorry Holly if you're watching, is actually on the state task force. So she'll provide us some inside information. I've talked to her recently about what's coming out of that, so we'll get some good feedback from her directly as a member of that task force. So good questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Mrs. Mitchell.
Thank you, President Brown. I just did want to say I'm thrilled that even though there's a little bit of a silver lining, the regular cleaning during the flu season that will come out of this is definitely an upgrade. So thank you for looking at that and being able to work that into the plans. I guess one question I had is, Dr. McGarry, you had said that you were considering a survey to parents. In that survey, will there be a question something like, will you be choosing the Upper Darby Cyber Academy for the next school year? Just because I know that's an option. And I know that, we only have a certain amount of licenses purchased for that. What does that look like if we were to have an increase in enrollment in that area?
I would not be recommending the Cyber Academy. I would be recommending the Upper Darby School District's regular learning platform. So one of the key parts to this is, and I appreciate you bringing that up, Ms. Mitchell, is we want to move away from the purchasing of some of the platform that we have with the Cyber Academy. And from this point until at least June 10th, we're going to get that much closer to having our own courses and our own teachers designing the instruction that's going to be there, so that we can move away from having to purchase these licenses that exist in our Cyber Academy. Over time, our goal will be to have our own school district curriculum and lessons and instruction taking place in the Cyber Academy. That way, we'll have this ability to have flexible instruction happening with our own courses. So as we roll in the next school year, that's why I want to gather this information. we'll be able to say, as we schedule the school, that these are the lessons that are provided through Schoology, and teachers will know that they have to develop those lessons virtually, as well as provide some instruction in person. So we're going to navigate that based on that data.
So even if school were to go back in session regularly, if they relax all of the guidelines and were able, but parents still chose to educate at home, are you saying the teachers in the regular classroom setting would be also putting those lessons on Schoology and maybe going live and things like that throughout the day? Because I do think there's going to be a subset of parents that choose to stay home.
Yes, and we'll cross that bridge when we see what the actual number will be, because I think there's going to be a lot of students that do want to come in, and sometime child pressure versus adult pressure, child pressure wins, I hope. But I do know that we're navigating the reality that things are going to be different, and the different will be that we're going to have classes that are in person and classes that are blended and classes that are virtual, and that our teachers in this school district will be providing those lessons and that game plan. That's why we closed early to develop that and get to a more robust virtual instruction instead of logging in and just completing assignments.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Buford, were there any other comments or questions from the board? Dr. Haig, do you have a go back?
I just was trying to maybe clarify what Mrs. Mitchell was saying, or maybe not clarify. I just wondered if maybe her point was that if a parent is going to choose cyber school, we'd certainly hope that they would pick ours as opposed to other alternatives.
Thank you. If there is no other comments or questions from the board, Mr. Rogers, please feel free to go on to agenda item number 2. Thank you, Mr. Lee.
The next agenda item is the online school tax payment options, which again will require board action. We are going to have Marvin Lee present this as well. So go ahead, Marvin.
Thank you. This one is a kind of short one. The business office has been working with our tax processing company and our bank to make sure the online portal, payment portal, is available to our taxpayers. Today, we will provide updates on our progress. Quick overview of the online payment program. So there are approximately 29,000 property owners that pay school taxes, and the mailing the payments to the lockbox used to be the only option for the taxpayers. However, with a new online payment program, our taxpayers will be able to submit payments online and also through phone. If the taxpayer chooses to make payments online, the system will authenticate the taxpayer. The taxpayer will create online account and make payments. Then the taxpayer will be able to get the receipt right away. Through the system, the taxpayer can also see the account status and the payment history. The financial impact of this program to the Upper Dhabi School District and the taxpayers. If the taxpayer makes the payment through credit card, either through online or phone, the taxpayer will be charged 2.6% fee. However, there's no payment required from the Upper Dhabi School District. If the taxpayer makes payment through electronic check, through bank routing number and the bank account number, there is no charge to the taxpayer, but the school district will pay 30 cents per transaction. That's actually a saving for the Upper Dhabi School District, because if the taxpayer sends the check to the lockbox, the school district used to pay 40 cents. So if the taxpayer chooses this option, we will save 10 cents per transaction. There's also $2,500 one-time setup fee that school district has to pay. Implementation timeline. Here's our timeline. The most critical step of the whole process was to make sure the tax file on our end worked with the Wells Fargo system, and we are happy to announce that the file compatibility was checked out okay. And once the board approves, we will go ahead and sign up the underwriting process and also building the online portal. Our solicitor already reviewed the legal document required for the underwriting process, so we are good to go there. So we expect the testing to be done by June 22nd. We expect the system to be launched by June 29th. Finally, on July 1st, our tax office will send tax bills with information about the electronic payments to all taxpayers on July 1st. Finally, here is how we will be communicating and supporting our taxpayers. First of all, when we send out the tax bills, there will be information about different options, online payment and phone payment. And second, Maureen from our tax office reached out to Abu Dhabi Public Library System to get access to our taxpayers and also create a hyperlink in the library system computers. So there are 3 locations, public library locations in Abu Dhabi, and the township was more than happy to work with us to make the computers available to our taxpayers. After that, we will create one-page document to provide payment options, important dates, contact information, maybe FAQ, and that one-page summary will be available in our website. Lastly, our business office will have trained employees to support the taxpayers with any issues. So that's the end of the presentation, but what I wanted to mention one more thing. Ms. Maureen Williams from our tax office has been heading this project, and she deserves a lot of credit to making sure that we are making progress as planned. Thank you, Ms. Williams, and thank you for your time, and this concludes our presentation about the online tax payment.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. We have a question from 3 questions. Okay. Mr. Neal, we'll start with you.
Hello, this is Mr. Desnoyers. My question is about the online payment option. If a taxpayer decides to pay using the online system, will they be able to set up a payment plan, meaning an installment payment plan, I guess I'll say, or is the online option, and for that matter, the phone option, just a one-time payment? Thank you.
So, Mr. Desnoyers, the payment options will still follow the guidelines of all of our typical bills. This is only giving the taxpayer another medium to make payment versus strictly having to send a check or money order through our lockbox. So you could pay in installments like you normally could in the 3 installments should you pay your first installment before the deadline, but it's not going to create any new installment features, really. We're going to follow our normal tax billing cycle.
Okay, so if I wanted to split my tax payment over several payments, could I log in online and pay, say, a third of it, then the next month log in online, pay another third, and then the next month you log in? I'd have to log in, 1 time for each, portion of the payment I wanted to make. Is that correct?
That's correct, but remember, you wouldn't be able to dictate the price. You
Right.
would have to pay what the installment's calculated at. So like if somebody wanted to come in and pay half and then pay a quarter later and a quarter after that, that's not how it works. It's 3 equal installments following our deadlines. So if you miss the deadline for the first installment, you no longer are able to pay those installments. You have to pay the flat or penalty if you miss the flat window.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add to this, because I don't think Marvin touched on it, the way that the system works is, and when he talked about, he quickly touched on building out the website. What would happen is you would go in and either put your folio number or your bill number in and verify your property, and your tax bill would essentially pull up on the website. And what's great about that is to not allow people to pay the wrong amounts, because what happens right now, and it takes a lot of time, and back to Marvin's previous point, a lot of Maureen Williams' time. So again, thank you to Maureen, but what happens is we'll have people send checks to our lockbox, and if it doesn't match exactly, the lockbox forwards them back to us. So during high tax season, July through October really, we get buckets of mail of people who are sending the wrong check amounts. We then have to manually go through those, find out what the issue was, why they were rejected from the lockbox, and resolve them, whether that be mailing it back with a letter to the taxpayer, or potentially they put the wrong folio number, and we can research all those topics and be able to get them paid. By creating this online payment, the taxpayer is able to verify their information on their own prior to making the payment. It'll pop up in front of them.
Thank you for that information.
Mr. Fields? Oh, Mr. Neal? Okay, Mr. Neal.
All right, thank you, President Brown. My first question is the 2.6% fee charged to the taxpayer. Is this the fee that the credit card agency is charging, and is that the fee, like there's no icing on the cake for them? There's like, we're not profiting off of that.
No, it's strictly a pass-through fee, so the district is not incurring any additional costs for the added service. So as you said, it's a credit card processing fee that is directly associated with the taxpayer's payment option.
Okay, and my second question is regarding mortgage companies. So I don't pay the bill directly myself. My mortgage company does. Does the school district work with larger mortgage companies? For instance, mine is through Wells Fargo, and I know our account's at Wells Fargo, to possibly switch them over to the electronic check, because like Marvin said earlier, it did save us 10 cents, and dimes add up. Is that a possibility that we can work with the larger mortgage companies to transition them to a cheaper option for us?
So there are currently, and has been for quite some time, certain banks or mortgage companies who pay directly. Wells Fargo is actually one of them, and it comes through as one payment, David. So we get one big check with a report that breaks down each tax payment. So, and that's actually automatically uploaded into our e-tax track system. So your savings would be 10 cents on that one check, because it's one check for thousands of properties. And we only in a given year get 3 mortgage, we call them mortgage tape payments, because they come through as if it's you ran a tape and you have each property on there. There's 3 or 4 main companies, but Wells Fargo does their own. Some of the smaller mortgage companies go through a company called Loretta, and there's 2 other ones, and the names are escaping me, but they all come through as batch payments together. But so that's a great question, but right now they are using their economies of scale to be as efficient as possible.
Okay, so currently this is really going to just impact individuals that are paying their tax bills individually, then?
That's correct. So if you do not have an escrow account set up through your mortgage company and you're paying out of your personal bank account, this is the taxpayer that we're addressing here.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Ms. Buford, you said there was one more board member? That's it? Okay. All right, if there's no other questions or comments from board members, thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Thank you, Mr. Rogers, for answering the questions, and thank you, Ms. Williams, for your hard work as well. Next agenda item, please.
So agenda item number 3 is the administration building relocation, which will require board action. I'm going to hand this presentation over to our Assistant Facility Supervisor, Craig Harnachek.
Good evening. As you're aware, the district has been looking for a place to relocate the administrative staff currently housed at the Aronimink property, with the upcoming Aronimink project causing them to be displaced shortly in the future. We're looking at a move-out date no later than July 30th, 2021. The district's explored several alternatives. My position here is just to discuss the options in taking the current transportation facility at 8201 North Lansdowne Avenue and converting that into not only a maintenance and bus housing facility, but also the new administration building. We've looked at the property, and it's largely underutilized. The entire second floor is over 12,000 square feet, and that neatly dovetails with the requirements that we have for our administrative staff. What we could do with a capital investment is bring our administrative staff into the building, bring the functionality level up to closer to 100%, correct deficiencies that we have to address in the building, irregardless of them moving or not. There are two options that we've drawn at this point in time. One option would be if the Sanitation Department were to leave that site, and this is our more favored option, both in a cost and a functionality standpoint. The second option would be if the Sanitation Department opts to stay at their current location and remain housed on the property. If we can just proceed to the first slide. The first slide shows the existing conditions, the bus parking layouts, and the shortfalls that the building currently has. As you can see, there's no organized parking for our bus attendants and drivers. There is no handicapped access to the building. There are no handicapped toilet facilities. The access to the second floor is not code compliant. Bus parking is sort of a hodgepodge of areas where they can squeeze in when the buses are off-site, and a large unimproved lot towards the back of the property that's currently covered in trees that we're looking to actually remove and extend parking further up. There's currently only one visitor parking space available. There is 75,000 square feet of gravel covering the area that requires paving at this point in time and in the future. And as I said earlier, the building site does require numerous repairs just to keep the building itself intact. And I'm speaking about pointing of walls, replacement of doors, failing windows, sills, degradation of some of the parapet walls. Next slide, please. This slide reflects the site plan without the Sanitation Department on site. What we have here is 139 parking spaces allocated to all the bus drivers and aides. This would remove the parking burden that we presently face on the neighborhoods adjacent to the property where bus drivers and aides are forced to park due to the current parking restrictions, and then also the shopping centers where they transit back and forth. There are 25 visitor parking spaces located at the front of the property with 3 handicap spaces added. During the board meetings, when we exceed that capacity, they would obviously be in the evening where bus transiting wouldn't be taking place. So we'd also have that additional 139 spaces of bus and aid parking available for that use. The bus parking is organized for the maximum level of efficiency for moving buses on and off the property and getting them out of the rear of the building. The problem is there's choke points that the buses have to pass through, blind turns, things like that, that are always problematic, especially when you're dealing with a vehicle that's over 40 feet in length. The transportation traffic would then also be relegated to one side of the building. Currently, we have both staff, transportation, and sanitation all using the same driveway, all basically at the same time, which is obviously problematic. And then you can see the ball field up to the top right-hand side. That would be preserved. We would leave that green space virtually untouched moving forward, because with the vacating of sanitation, we have enough area to house our bus parking. Now, the Sanitation Department would probably want to be moving in around March of 2020. That would allow us to get in, do our paving work, do our drainage work to accommodate the final renovation for the move-in of the balance of the staff. Next slide, please. This site plan shows the sanitation remaining on site. And as you can see, we've moved into that entire green space, the former ball field, paved that entire lot. And we're still moving through those choke points, as you can see, coming from the one side of the building towards the front. Obviously not the best scenario for us. And then again, we would still have sanitation and transit using the same driveway. Staff would be relegated to the other driveway on the other side of the property. The bus parking is less efficient. As I said, the choke points are problematic, And then also, our site costs would be higher, and then we'd be losing that green space that we currently have. So it is the less desirable of the two options. Next slide, please. These are the floor plans for the first and second floor for the interior of the building. What we're doing moving forward is providing for handicapped access, both parking and in and out of the building, handicapped access to the second floor of the building, dedicated toileting facilities to segregate the public, the staff, and the bus drivers, and then also handicap capacity for all of those groups. There's secured pathways within the building to limit public access and separate staff that don't require any type of public interface from public areas. We will then have code-compliant emergency exits as required from the building. There will be a multi-purpose space for training, board functions, and in-service day functions. There'll be a high storage system for our paper filing requirements. There's interior parking to house our maintenance vehicles, which are more or less filled with tools that are subject to vandalism if they're parked outside, even on the lot, even in a secured area. The internal bus traffic is also improved and will be addressing some structural requirements that we can't currently due to buses turning inside the facility. This eliminates the buses having to turn once they enter the parking garage. It'll just be a straight move and in and out. And then we'll also be adding an additional bus service bay for housing buses and providing long-term storage for an additional bus. In addition to that, we'll be addressing the deficiencies in the building, the pointing requirements, roofing requirements, waterproofing, windows, masonry issues, failing doors, and parapet walls. Thank you for your patience, and this time I'll take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hornacek. Are there any questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Buford? Sure. Mr. Fields, do you have a comment or question?
Thank you, Mr. President. This is Don Fields. The first question I have is, has this property ever been looked at before? Like, has any other planning work ever been done on this property to see if any development is possible? And then the second question is, how have the conversations with the township been going as far as sanitation moving off the property?
I can't speak to any prior discussions that have taken place. Obviously, I'm relatively new in the history of the district, but to my knowledge, no. There has been no planning for an expansion prior to this point, and I'd like to turn it over to Craig Rogers for his discussions with the Sanitation Department.
Yeah, so Craig is right that as far as we know, there has not been any planning, especially for any use other than what it's currently being used as. Until we got to this point, we started really looking at what our alternatives were for district administration, which included looking at many different building lease options, potentially purchasing, looking for internal space throughout the district, and that's where we came to this site. So, you know, that's how we got there. As far as communication with the township, we've had multiple meetings with them about various topics and, you know, how the district and the township work together as a team. They seem to be okay with the idea, but, you know, they are well aware of this presentation and the idea of us taking over that portion of the site, and, you know, we will work hand in hand with them through this process.
All right, thanks, Craig. I just want to say I really do appreciate the work that Craig Archek and Marvin Lee have been doing. And what I really like about this administration is the combination of institutional knowledge that some of our longer time members have, as well as the outside perspective that our newer members have. Administration it allows for a lot of good work to get done, and it's much appreciated.
Okay, Dr. McGarry.
Yes, two different things. One, I want to make sure I remind the public how to participate this evening. You can participate by sending an email to committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org. Please provide your name, an address, and which agenda item you'd like to leave a comment or question that we can address. Or you can certainly phone a question or comment in, 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Same idea, please, your name, address, and the agenda item you'd like to question or leave a comment for so that we can address it this evening. And I just want to quickly say, Don Fields, Board Member Fields, I agree. Craig and Marvin have been a welcome addition to the school district. And by the way, for those joining this tonight looking at this, what Craig Harnachek put together, these drawings and this idea, this concept, he put together on his own. So that's an internal look at it. We didn't even have to pay for an architect to look at that yet at this point in time, although we have gone on to bring in costs associated with this. So you could turn it over to the next board member.
Thank you, Dr. McGarrett, for those important reminders. Ms. Buford, was there another comment or question from a board member? Mr. Neal.
Thank you, President Brown. I'm not sure who could answer this, but I know as our district grows, and I assume we're going to increase enrollment, 10, 20 years from now, will this space be sufficient for additional staffing needs within the administration? And where would we see that need?
So, David,
I think the building portion of the question, we can probably accommodate 10 to 15% more in the building. The current layout does not reflect that, but we can build that in. That's not an issue. As to staffing, I have to defer that to someone else.
yeah, and David, when you speak to increased enrollment, the people who would be housed in this facility or who are currently housed in the central office at Aronimink. So, if enrollment went up and that impacted the number of teachers, that's obviously not going to be reflected in this building. I think that one other thing that Craig had pointed out quickly is the other piece of this is Craig found space on the first floor to be able to actually incorporate a boardroom. So what that does for us is actually gets us off the high school campus. And for anybody watching in the community, they realize when you come to a board meeting, when there's any kind of event, whether it be a student event, athletic event, parking is at a premium on this campus. So removing the public venue of a board meeting and being able to put it on an isolated campus where you're not dealing with those same type of interactions is a major benefit to us. And Craig was able to even incorporate visitor parking as close to what would be the front entrance as possible. So, to Dan's point as well, Craig did a fantastic job with this, and we have not hired an architect to do a full rendering at this point, but we did bring in an engineer to do a costing out so that we would have those numbers available for the cost of the project.
Okay, and so some staff members right now, work out in the schools. They spend a lot of their time out with teachers, the coaches. Would they have space available in the administration building for them to, spend a day to work there? Would there be empty desks basically that someone could come into and work from? That way we can free rooms up at the schools in which they're actually taking up space.
So that's a great question. Currently, right now, one of the changes we've made recently to our current administrative office about 2 years ago is we actually converted a copy room into a small conference room because space is at a premium all throughout the district. And I will tell you that from the time that we've created that small conference room, it's been utilized in the way that you're stating, where there's teams that come in, the coaches, special ed supervisor, or multiple supervisors go in and use that space very frequently. In Craig's design, he's added multiple small conference rooms that would be able to be utilized in that way. We can certainly go back and like Craig said, I'm sure there's some space that can be created for an additional officer to evaluate whether or not that's a direction we want to go in.
Okay, yeah, I think it's important that we take a look at the schools and see what space is available to that's actually currently being used in that sort of situation that students can't use, because coaches are in there or district staff are in there, like the boardroom at the high school, where we can actually move that away from the schools and put them into this administration building. So thank you for that.
We currently have several cubicles available, probably somewhere in the order of 5 to 10 they're vacant at this point in time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Buford, were there any other comments or questions from board members? Well, Dr. McGarry, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to say to David Neal's point, and Craig Harnachek and Craig Rogers and the board members know, this is for the public, we're looking at this option because there is really no space, and I think David Neal's point is well noted. We attempted to lease facilities outside of the district because there wasn't currently space available for us to make that happen. I know Craig Rogers will talk about in the long term how this actually will be more cost effective than leasing the spaces outside of the school district. But I know Craig Harnachek and I, we spent some time looking to try to offset to board member David Neal's question, how can we free up teaching and learning space and get the curriculum instruction or the administrators in a building to work together, even trying to figure out a way to have central registration, busing, and everything all in one area, make use of space. So to David Neal's point, we've looked at all of those options. Even when it's all said and done, we still, even after renovating this, will still need space. What we are really trying to address right now is to get out of Aronimink to provide the space for more instructional opportunities at the elementary level. And right here in this room that we're sitting in, when I was a high school student, this was a college and career planning room that will try to free this back up for the high school to be able to use this space instead of it being a boardroom. So we do feel that we're making those examples to try to free up space for educational reasons in the district. And this space would allow us to do that, or at least get closer to that.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry, for that additional explanation.
Ms. Buford, any other comments or questions? Okay, Mrs. Mitchell.
I just wanted to thank you for your creative look at this particular building. I know the building needs a lot of work, but also to Mr. Neal's point, there will be a whole boardroom on the first floor that I'm sure staff could utilize that we're only going to use in the evenings twice a month. And I know Dr. McGarry holds some staff meetings and things there. So, so there will be that space available. So thank you for this creative look in one of our existing facilities and trying to figure out how to better utilize it and, give it a much needed upgrade for the conditions that we presently have. So thank you.
My pleasure. The boardroom will actually be a multi-purpose room. We're planning on in-service functions, training functions there, just as a boardroom. It would really be underutilized. So we're looking to really move that much more to the forefront.
Thank you, Mr. Hornacek. Thank you for the expertise. Mr. Neal.
I just had a question. Are we discussing whether or not the board of directors prefers to have the sanitation department on the property or off the property? Are we discussing that now, or is this sort of these are possible options and we'll discuss later?
Dr. McGarry.
Yes, I believe the administrator's recommendation would be to work with the township to have the sanitation removed to keep the open space on the back of the property. I know that in my conversations with the mayor in particular, I know that they'd prefer to try to keep the use of the open space in the field. I know that the district, as much of that as we can. I think with Craig Harnachek's plan that's been outlined, we feel the flow is better if we can work with the township and relocate the sanitation trucks that are there. The development would cut down on our blacktopping any more of the area, keep some of the open space that already exists there, and allow us to actually have better flow in and out of the property if we were able to do that. So the recommendation from the administration, Craig, would be that we would like to work with the township to ask them to take back the sanitation and then go from there. And our conversations have been positive and productive. They will need some time, but March of 2021, I think, as long as it's not tomorrow or next week, would provide them that opportunity to do so. So, Mr. Neal, to your comment, the administration's recommendation would be to ask and work with the township to remove the sanitation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, because I wanted to try to push for to keep that green space, and during your discussions with the township to find out any additional or incurred costs for trash removal from our district buildings.
Yes, we're on that as well. I know Craig and I have had those conversations.
Okay, Ms. Buford, if there's no other comments or questions from the board, Mr. Rogers, I'll turn it back over to you.
Just to summarize too, to Dan's point, talking about the fiscal part of this, we did hire an engineer to go out. The board approved us to have that engineer go out and do a costing study on both models to get an idea of projected costs. The projected cost comes in at between $15.9 and $16.2 million. So the comment that Dan had made is, how does that look for the future and as far as making the fiscally responsible decision? So like we previously stated, and we have discussed at previous meetings, we've looked at leasing buildings. So if you compare the leasing of a building to relocate central administration versus investing funds into a building that you own, the bond associated with issuing, being able to do these improvements would be paid off over 25 years. You'd have that asset for a very long time. A conservative useful life of something like that is 40 to 50 years. And here in Upper Darby, we find ways to stretch that well beyond 40 to 50 years. On the other side of that, if you were to pay a lease year after year with a modest 3% increase to your lease payments year over year, that same amount of money would be spent within those 25 years, depending on the leasing options, square footage of the lease, and at the end of that, you have nothing to show for it. You don't own the building, you've leased it, and eventually have to go somewhere anyway, unless as a district we were committing to permanently leasing a facility for district administration. I would not recommend that because it's an annual incurred cost in perpetuity. So when you go to look at whether you want to invest those dollars into a property we own versus leasing, we do believe this is the more fiscally responsible option. Early on in our plans for improving the facilities and being able to build new schools, we had the idea that 69th Street would become an elementary school, and we've since learned that property has some issues where we may not be able to build on that property. And what would happen there is you'd have to look at how to adjust with the elementary schools and the buildings we have. So there was an idea at one point that maybe 5-7 years from now, we would be able to turn around, renovate the kindergarten center, and turn that into an administration building. It looks like now we will need that for educational space, potentially as an elementary school, or as we plan to move forward. But the idea there is, even if you were to rent for say 5 to 7 years in our original plan, you still would then have to turn around and renovate the kindergarten center, which is set up to be a school, and turn it into a office building essentially. So there would have been a mass capital improvement cost associated with that as well. So it's somewhat of a shift to another internal site that the district owns.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. I think we've covered everything, all the questions and concerns of board members for that agenda item. Please move on to the next one. Thank you.
So next up, we have the 2020-2021 budget update, and this is informational. So we'll jump right into this. I'm actually going to hand it over to Dr. McGarry to kick it off.
Sure. I'm working. What I've noticed when I review these meetings, I'm always looking down. So I'm going to try to look up and not be rude. So the budget process, as we've discussed last month, we'll continue to update before the board takes final action, and we want to review the timeline again. So in November of 2019, the budget process, we kicked it off publicly with a review of the Act 1 timeline, and we talked about the difference between a preliminary budget versus an accelerated opt-out. At the time, we talked about our base index of 2.6% or adjusted index of 3.8%. In November, we were talking with the board and the public about, what can we afford, our taxpayers afford, and what do we need as a school district. And rightfully so, the Board of School Directors decided to take the accelerated opt-out and passed a resolution in December to not exceed the adjusted index of 3.8%. I know we've received some questions over the last couple of months from members in the public about what have we worked our way from. So I just want to pause on this again. The highest taxable opportunity the school district had was to go to the adjusted index of 3.8%. The Board of School Directors passed an accelerated opt-out not to exceed 3.8% in December, not to tax the local taxpayers at the highest possible rate that they could. I know we've received these questions periodically at meetings saying it's clear that you're taxing people as high as you can. We are not. In fact, we're going to the base index, and we'll get to that in a moment. So in December, the board, rightfully so, passed a resolution not to exceed the adjusted index of 3.8%. In May, we came back and discussed, also around that same period of time, December, we talked with the public about a possible tax increase of 3.5%. So we agreed not to go to 3.8. We came back and looked at a 3.5% tax increase, which will be on a slide later on. And then we obviously had an opportunity to readjust our budget. The pandemic hit, and we're now in front of you at this point in time in June talking about bringing our tax increase down to the index. In May, the board approved the 2021 proposed final budget, and in that tax increase, we looked at a 2.6%. So we moved our way from a 3.8% to a 3.5% to now we're looking at a 2.6%. We also wanted to remind the public again of the timeline. The June 3rd is the notice of the intent to adopt a final budget. We'll have a conversation at that period of time as well. On June 16th, the board will adopt the final budget. If there's any issues or concerns from this evening all the way up until obviously June 16th, the board has to be aware and the public has to be aware that school districts, and there has been no waiver or change at this point in time, must adopt and approve a balanced final budget by June 30th, 2020. The reason why we are looking to do ours by June 16th is so that we can get our tax offices ready to go to put out a tax bill to make sure that we are able to collect that money to balance, to provide our programs. Again, what were we considering prior to the mandated closures? This came up from a member of the public in a couple different meetings, and we'll keep answering this question. Budget considerations pre-mandated closure. We were looking to convert existing lead teachers, 8 of them in our elementary schools, into assistant principals. There are many, many unfunded state mandates, teacher evaluation, state testing, data collection that require someone with a certification in administration to be able to provide those resources for us. And right now we're asking someone under a teacher certification to do that work, and we were going to look to convert to assistant principals. We were also going to add 6 reading specialists to the elementary level, again trying to get back to those much needed resources that we lost 8 or 9 years ago. We were looking to add and build guidance counselor positions into the elementary school. This past year, through our use of title funds, last year we were able to put guidance counselors into some of our elementary schools, and we never had them before, thanks to the leadership of this board. We were again looking to build and add 5 more guidance counselors to our elementary schools. We were looking to add 1 network technician and some support to media services in the budgeting process prior to the mandated closures. That was a little bit under $2 million in estimated costs, and at that time, that would have been a tax increase of 3.5% below the adjusted index of 3.8%. Prior to COVID-19, we were looking to go out at a 3.5% tax increase.
So next up, we have the slide that we continue to revisit just to show the historic view of the district's tax increase versus the base index and the adjusted index. So as we reviewed at the previous committee meeting, you can see in yellow what the actual increase was. Right below that, the base index and the adjusted index. And as Dr. McGarry pointed out, this year's base index is 2.6% with an adjusted index of 3.8. So here's a slide where we'd like to go through the actual impact of the right now approved proposed final budget at 2.6. So through community outreach and questioning, it was asked of us to add another column to the right-hand side, and we've added the $350,000 assessment mark which is the only difference to this slide in comparison to the previous presentation. And that shows a 2.6 and a $350,000 tax assessment. It's an annual impact of $344 for the year. And again, I'll reiterate that these assessments are based on the current assessments. It is not the countywide reassessment that everyone just received in the mail. In addition to adding the $350,000 assessment, we had a few comments come in regards to our projected bond issuance to cover capital improvements, which would be Aronimink and any other projects that we have planned, that maximum resolution of $38 million. As we presented, the millage study requirement shows previously that it would take 0.69% going into next year's budget. So this slide just shows you of the 2.6% tax increase, 0.69 is built in, and that is a direct impact to the taxpayer within the 2.6. So it's part of it. And you'll see that we've presented, and it was showing $19. This is all rounded, so you'll see it's $75,000 assessment, a $20 impact. If you were to go up to $150,000 assessment, it's $39 a year. Or $350,000 all the way to the right would be $91 for the year. And again, same as the previous slide, these are current assessments, not the reassessment that's upcoming in the following year.
So, as we talked last month, we talked about the assumptions. So if we are to continue to move forward based on these following assumptions, that we are opening schools on time in August, not in a virtual setting, that we're able to get back to teaching and learning as we once knew it. This would take into consideration a 2.6% tax increase, which is the base index. Again, the school board is going to the base index, if they authorize this, not to the highest taxable opportunity they could. Under a 2.6% tax increase, not only do we get the 0.69% toward the bond issuance of improving our facilities and renovating and expanding Aronimink Elementary School, it allows us to maintain staffing, the 2019-20 staffing, so there will be no new staffing added. So the slide previous to turning lead teachers into assistant principals, the guidance counselor positions being added, as well as the positions related to guidance, a 2.6% does not allow us to add that staff, but a 2.6% does allow us to maintain current staffing, the 19-20 staffing that we have right now going into next school year. It also is based on the fact that the state will level fund its current funding of public education, as well as federal funding will be level based on the 19-20 funding that we saw this past school year. Prior to COVID-19, we were anticipating an increase of $1.2 million in the basic education funding. I think we'd be pretty rest assured that we will not be seeing that 1.2 increase. Prior to COVID-19, we thought that we might see a $270,000 increase into our special education funding at a state level. We are now not anticipating receiving those dollars. And state funding could decrease, no less than the 3-year average. And we were trying to look into this information as we built this budget. In order to get staffing where we need it, we went back and looked at a 2.6% tax increase. Again, it includes the 2020 bond issuance for capital projects and the Aronimink project. It does not include CARES Act funding because we're still working our way through the state guidance. At this point in time, we have been told, and we have received some information, that we should share or use the CARES funding with non-public schools, similar to how we allocate our Title I funding, our share of Title I funding to non-public schools. There is still some debate on how that's being interpreted and how that money can be shared. And the recommendation at a state level is to not actually budget it in your budget, to consider that as a one-time revenue for things such as PPE, technology, or other resources to help you get through this period of time. Budget unknowns and impacts that are still out there as just before this public meeting took place. There's consideration still on a state level of a 0% tax increase. There's the delivery of instruction, virtual or online only versus flexible instruction, as we talked about in the presentation with Marvin Lee, where we discussed the idea that even if we go green, will still have to have a plan to provide virtual or blended learning, some days in, some days online instruction, especially if the rumors are true that there could be another uptick of COVID-19 in the winter. We should be prepared to handle that, and there's a cost associated with planning for that. Nonetheless, if there is a 0% tax increase, if it's a forced 0% tax increase, here's what we would have to do to balance our budget. We would have to consider program curtailment, which is a process, a Chapter 4 process, where the administration would have to look at cutting specific programs, academic programs, looking at how we can meet those same standards with existing staff in order to balance our budget. So we'd have to make program curtailment considerations. We'd have to also reduce the capital projects. We'd have to make a consideration to forgo some of the projects that we have in the school district. One of them obviously would be, as you see on this list, delaying the Aronimink project with a 0% tax increase. We'd have to institute a hiring freeze, as well as through attrition and retirement, the consideration of not rehiring staff, in particular not rehiring staff at the high school, because there is some wiggle room as it relates to credits and Chapter 4 requirements. It would require us to really relook at how we provide our instruction, in particular to high school students, and how much staff we would need if we were to readjust our programs and readjust our credit requirements. Currently, the class of 2023, our current freshman class, has the opportunity to graduate with 21 credits. It is not mandatory that they leave with 21 credits. A 0% tax increase would force us to look at adjusting how many credits we allow high school students to take in order to graduate. We'd have to reduce our hourly employees. We'd have to reduce our capital reserve transfer, which we're trying to build up to have a stable capital reserve for unexpected things such as a leaking roof or a boiler that would break or any unforeseen issues that our buildings have that are old. We'd have to reduce our transfer of money into our capital reserve. We also potentially would see a reduced bond rating based on the use of fund balance, because the board and the public may ask the district to use more fund balance, more of our savings to cover the cost in a 0% tax increase instead of delaying some of these projects. And that's a one-time use of that money. You very rarely get that money back. And then a reminder that we all have to do all of this prior to June 30th. There are still unknowns as far as the state budget is concerned. There's talks of their budget at the state level being passed in multiple phases, and that we may have to go back in even as after June and reopen our budget if the state allows that to happen, to make some changes. Of the list of items that you see here, once we pass our final budget, if there are changes at a state or federal level, we would have to go into bullet point number 1. The last opportunity for us to balance our budget once we have passed and we've already put out for our tax collection would be to change our programs in the school district. And I know that that would be one of the last things we want to do. We have been having those conversations with our staff and our faculty, and we'd like to hold off on cutting programs as much as possible here in the school district.
So next what we did was we actually put together a visual to show where we are, and if there were any mandated 0% tax increases, how does that impact this budget? So moving left to right, the second column is the actual approved proposed final budget at a 2.6% tax increase. This amount is the exact same layout as our previous presentation, showing the $208 million in revenue, $215.4 million in expenditures, having our expenditures exceed our revenue of $7.3 million. And if you were to factor in that 2.6% tax increase, that's an additional revenue of $1.97, leaving you having to commit $5.375 million of fund balance. If there was a 0% tax increase and we had no change to the expenditures, and you take that 1.9 out, you now have to commit $7.35 million of fund balance to balance your budget. The final column on the right-hand side is a mandated 0% tax increase with a reduction to expenditures to balance the budget the same as the approved proposed final budget. So the difference here is obviously reducing your expenditures by $1.977 million. So in order to do so, this next slide will break down the actual impacts of some of the previous slide that Dr. McGarry spoke about. So first, I'll just discuss the revenue impact of a 0% tax increase. Many look at a 0% mandated tax increase as level funding. In Upper Darby, due to assessment loss from the current year to next year of almost over $13 million of assessment loss, that actually equates to a loss of revenue of roughly $530,000 of revenue. So a 0% mandated tax increase would be a loss of revenue for Upper Darby School District, not level funded. So that's one of the main impacts that is somewhat buried into these numbers that we're talking about. And if you remember from the previous presentation, when you look at the 1920 budget versus the 2021 budget, a 1.9% increase almost gave you the exact same dollar amount increase as a 2.6. And that's due to that lost assessment. So we wanted to make that clear going through this presentation. And just as Dr. McGarry spoke previously about, the reduction in expenditures to quote unquote bounce the budget or bring it back to that use of fund balance of the 5 million, 5.3, you could go, we're looking at reduction in attrition, which comes out to around $500,000, potential program curtailment, which is really a plug, meaning we would have to have a range to pull back. The others would be capital project delays. So if you were to delay one project versus multiple, you're talking about a bond issuance of a lower amount. So that could be anywhere from a reduction in expenditures in the 2020-2021 budget of $280,000 all the way up to $500,000. The reason why we would still be issuing a bond, we've gone out and we've started projects, paving projects. At the previous board meeting, we approved 2 window projects, one at Beverly Hills and one at Garriford Elementary, and there are a few others going through the pipeline now. So that's why it wouldn't completely eliminate the bond payment, because we would still be issuing a bond. It would just, again, we issued a resolution that we wouldn't go above 38 million, which obviously means we can come in under that. So those are the dollar amounts that are associated with that. The other piece is future consideration for contracted services, and we have here to be determined. Now, board member Leah Dahl has actually brought up at a good time the idea of potentially outsourcing a service such as transportation. There are many districts in the area and in the state that choose to outsource transportation. I think many of them look at it from the perspective of a school district is in the business of educating children. They're not technically supposed to be in the business of transporting children. So what do we do best? We educate the children. Outsourcing services such as transportation, you would imagine a company who only transports children would be able to maybe offer a better service. They'd have bigger economies of scale and be able to update and maintain a fleet from a business perspective versus the district really looking at providing the best transportation service we can with the funds that we have. And that's just one example. And then again, when you consider all these things, there's obviously a negative impact on student achievement, and that's going to be insurmountable. To be able to catch up on those kind of expenditures, to get them back into the budget, and to be able to afford that becomes more and more challenging every year you have something like this happen. And I think anybody who watches these meetings or is a part of this board or community or staff knows that we always talk about when the stimulus funds went away years ago and the loss of reading specialists, and that impact to our test scores and the student achievement. So this is almost something that, in my mind, aligns very closely with that type of impact, and that we're still, trying to make leaps and bounds to catch up from that loss.
So the piece I'd like to add to this, as far as the reduction of expenditures and balance in the budget, we don't want to repeat history. So the reduction through attrition would be one where we don't want to see anybody lose their jobs that are teachers or folks that work here in the school district, because we're trying to recover from years ago. Unlike other school districts who are now feeling this maybe for the first time, Upper Darby's been here, and we're trying to rebuild the trust and the relationships not only with our staff but with this community. Bullet point number 2 is a fancy way of really saying getting rid of programs, cutting programs. It's the state's, one of the allowable exceptions for the state. One of them originally was furloughing staff. The other one is program curtailment, which is the school district would have to come together through curriculum and instruction, look at the state standards, and say, okay, what programs can we cut that we can cover in other ways with teacher certification, make those changes, and to balance the budget. As Craig has up here in the presentation, we have to find a way to get to a 0% tax increase that through attrition and reduction of staffing, and that $500,000 is a rough estimate of not bringing back 6 high school teachers, which has an impact on class size at the high school and potentially has an impact on class offerings at the high school. That's really the pain and suffering we're looking at the high school if this were to happen. That wouldn't get us there. We'd have to come back and then look at things such as the coaches, the instructional coaches that we might have in the school district, other programs that we have in the school district, the guidance counselors, or academic programs that may exist through program curtailment if that had to happen. What we learned from the past is this would be a conversation with the board and the public. It wouldn't be a message that we would just deliver this and say, here's where it is. We've already been having conversations with our teachers union at each level, as well as really spending a lot of time with all the departments at the high school to make sure that we understand what we're up against here as a school district. A 2.6% tax increase preserves this, allows us to get to where we need to get as a school district and community, improving our facilities, balancing what we have, and moving this school district forward in a competitive way. And I think that's why the administration is looking for that 2.6% tax increase moving forward, would be to allow these programs and these facilities improvements to have happen. We do not want to go backward. We're trying to build and move this school community forward.
And the final slide here is just to go through, again, we're going to revisit the Act 1 timeline that was presented before. Next steps are a public notice of the intent to adopt the final budget, which would occur on June 16th. That is a scheduled committee meeting, and we'll have a special voting meeting following the committee meeting. That will also include in the committee meeting another presentation of the budget, and then again, special meeting having the final adoption. And again, we just want to reiterate, we cannot approve a budget any later than June 30th, and that is state mandated. So at this time, are there any questions from the board?
I believe Vice President Mitchell has a comment or a question.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Craig, thanks again for this great presentation. I know this is the second time we've, seen this publicly to this detail, and I want to thank you for putting in those additional details on the higher, the higher tax assessments. What I did want to just stress is I was elected to the board in 2006. No, 2013. And when I got on the board, I had a different perspective on the taxes. And then I went to Harrisburg as a board director, not as a community member. Before that, I had just gone as a community member. And when I got in to speak with a lot of the legislators, ones that are in the upper tiers of making decisions, the leaders of the House and Senate, one of the questions these legislators kept posing to me is, well, did you go to your adjusted Act 1 index? And, I said, no, actually, we tried to keep our tax, around the base Act 1 index because our community already pays the majority of the school funding needs for our district. And they simply can't afford it anymore. And we continue to advocate, about this $16 to $17 to $18 million that we are underfunded from the state. And we do need the community to join us in asking for that. We are trying our best to keep the taxes as close to the base index as possible. If you look at this slide, I don't know, it's slide number 5. If perhaps we could put it up on the screen. We have been trying to keep it at or just above or just below the base index. The state does allow and has basically said, but you in Upper Darby, you can tax to this highest amount, basically because they're not willing to raise the taxes. So, unfortunately, this does get put down to local school districts, but we have a constitutional mandate to provide a thorough and efficient system of public education. So I do want to thank you for all of the creative ideas, the things that we've done to try to minimize it as much as possible. Thank you.
Ms. Buford, any other comments from board members? Okay, Mr. Rogers, thank you very much. Dr. McGarry, thank you very much for your comments and your explanation. Next item.
The next item is the policies, and this will require board action. So I'm actually going to hand this over to Mr. Desnoyers to lead the discussion on the 4 policies that are up tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. There are 4 policies that have gone through a first reading at the May board meeting 2 weeks ago and will be up for a second reading at the June board meeting, which will occur next Tuesday, June 2nd. And so the 4 policies being changed are Policy 335, Family and Medical Leaves, Policy 626, Federal Fiscal Compliance, Policy 810.1, Drug and Alcohol Testing for Covered Drivers, and Policy 904, Public Attendance at School Events. So I will read a summary of the changes to each of the policies. So for Policy 335, Family and Medical Leaves, there are actually no changes to the Policy 335 itself. However, the Federal Families First Coronavirus Response Act, or FFCRA, contains specific provisions for the expansion of family and medical leave and paid sick leave effective April 2nd, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. These temporary changes are explained in the new Families First Coronavirus Response Act attachment and a new employee rights poster that is both in English, and there's one in English and one in Spanish, that will be posted to district buildings and made available to district employees. Any school district employee considering taking a leave of absence is urged to review Policy 335 and the appropriate attachments carefully. Any questions may be addressed to Human Resources. Next is Policy 626, Federal Fiscal Compliance. Policy 626 is being revised to include language regarding payment of staff with federal funds in extenuating or emergency situations, in accordance with applicable law, regulations, or emergency declarations by state or federal authorities. Next up is Policy 810.1, Drug and Alcohol Testing for Covered Drivers. Federal regulations being implemented require substantial updates to Policy 810.1 and a new attachment, 810.1 AR0, that spells out drug and alcohol testing requirements and procedures for covered drivers. A covered driver is any district employee who drives, operates, or is in actual physical control or movement of a school bus, school vehicle, or commercial vehicle owned, leased, or operated by the school district. Basically, a covered driver is in a position in the district that requires a commercial driver's license to carry out. The specific regulations being implemented involve what's called a final rule issued by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration establishing the Commercial Driver's License Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. This national clearinghouse will contain commercial driver's license records. The district, as an employer of holders of commercial driver's licenses, will be required to perform a pre-employment search of this clearinghouse and an annual search of this clearinghouse for infractions for every covered driver. The nature and type of required testing is spelled out both in federal regulations and in Policy 810.1 and 810.1 AR0. Finally, Policy 904, Public Attendance at School Events. The updates to this policy are changes related to tobacco and vaping products. Similar changes have recently been made to Policy 222 and 323. These changes are required to comply with changes to Pennsylvania law. That concludes my presentation of changes to policies under consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Desnoyers, for that comprehensive explanation of those policy changes. Are there any comments or questions from the board? No? Mrs. Buford, nothing? Okay. Okay. All right, so public comment.
At this time, there are no public comments.
Okay. With that being said, Mr. Rogers, can you please review the agenda items presented this evening? Oh, there's a comment?
I just want to make sure
Dr. Gary.
that there wasn't a question, I think, Mrs. Buford, to your point, but there was one comment from a Mrs. McDevitt. We just said something about microphone not being able to be heard. I just want to make sure that we didn't discredit that one. That's all.
Yes, we did get that comment, and we adjusted Mr. Rogers' microphone to ensure that he can be heard over YouTube.
Thank you very much for that clarification, Dr. McGarry, and thank you, Ms. Buford.
Yes.
Mr. Rogers.
Again, we had 5 agenda items tonight. The first was the COVID-19 preparedness update, which was informational. Marvin Lee gave an update on our preliminary review of CDC guidelines and gave us a baseline for our future decisions. Agenda item number 2 is the online school tax payment options, which we would request board action. The district administration reviewed our options as far as accepting online payments moving forward into the future, and we require board action tonight.
Okay, so for the online school tax payment for board, agenda item number 2, is the board okay with moving that one forward?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Please signify by saying yes. I hear yeses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, any noes? Any abstains? Okay, so we're moving that one forward. Next agenda item.
Next is the administration building relocation. Mr. Craig Harnachek gave a review of the plans before us to be able to renovate the existing transportation and maintenance building and what it would take to be able to develop the site and the 2 options that were before the board. The administration's recommendations to move forward with the plan without sanitation, and we were looking for board action, and board action would be to move this forward to the next phase of design and be able to move forward towards the bidding of the actual project.
Okay, would the board like to move this item forward? Please signify by saying
Absolutely.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
yes. Okay, yes is sufficient. All right. Any noes? Any abstains? So I think that's unanimous. Next agenda item, Mr. Rogers.
Next up was the 2020-2021 budget update, which was informational. Dr. McGarry and myself provided an update on all the information that we have to this point and also elaborated on the impact of a 0% mandated tax increase. Number 5, policies, board action. There were 4 policies presented by Mr. Desnoyers. 335, family medical leaves. 626, federal fiscal compliance. 810.1, drug and alcohol testing for covered drivers. And 904, public attendance at school events.
Okay, if the board is okay with moving these policies forward, please signify by saying yes or say yes with the exception of whatever policy you would not like to move forward, please.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I think we're okay with moving those forward. There are any noes, any collective noes, any abstains? Okay. I think we're moving that forward. A motion is in order for adjournment of the Finance and Operations Committee meeting.
David Neal, second.
Okay, meeting adjourned. We will take a 3-minute break before we start the Education and Pupil Services. Thank you. Welcome back. The meeting of the Education and Pupil Services Committee will please come to order. I will now turn over the Education and Pupil Services Committee agenda to co-chair, Mrs. Rachel Mitchell.
Thank you, President Brown. We just have two short agenda items tonight, and I believe Mr. Marshallak will be reviewing the agenda. I'm going to turn it over.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. So tonight we have two agenda items, one of which is for board action, and the second is informational only. The first agenda item tonight is the ATSI school level plans. District Administration, Dr. Manfrey and Mr. Salerno, along with the principals from both schools, will be presenting tonight's presentation. And the second agenda item is informational only. It's an update that we promised the public and the board from earlier in this winter about the sleep study and the adolescent delayed start times for adolescents. So if you were okay, Ms. Mitchell, I'd like to begin.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, so the first agenda item tonight, again, is the ATSI school level plans. And what that stands for is Additional Target Support and Improvement. And what I'm going to do is turn it over to Dr. Manfrey and Mr. Salerno to get things started with tonight's presentation. Again, this is for board action at the June 16th committee meeting, special voting meeting. Dr. Manfrey, Mr. Salerno.
Thank you, Mr. Marshallak. Good evening, members of the board and Upper Darby School District community. I have with me here this evening presenting to you Mr. Salerno, as Mr. Marshallak said, the Director of Elementary Education, Dr. McCarthy, the Principal of Charles Kelly Elementary School, as well as Dr. Yerson, the Principal of Beverly Hills Middle School. We are here this evening to present to you a state-required school improvement plan, which are a result of both schools being identified, as Mr. Marshallak said, as additional targeted support and improvement schools. This is a designation provided to these schools by the state as a result of Every Student Succeeds Act, which requires, it's a federal act, that requires states to develop a plan to designate schools for school support and improvement. In this case, different than NCLB, these are for both academic and non-academic indicators. It includes both school-wide and targeted groups. There are three different designations that a state can designate schools. One is a comprehensive support and improvement designation, which nobody in our school district has. That is the most far-reaching designation and has the most implications. It is the most severe designation. I use the word severe, but it identifies schools that have the most significant challenges. ATSI schools are schools that are identified because groups of students have been identified as a challenge for those schools in the area of student achievement or possibly attendance, et cetera. And then there are targeted school improvement schools, which are the schools that are the least concern, so to speak. They are kind of the schools that are trending in a direction that could become ATSI schools. And as you know from previous presentations, we have Upper Darby High School is a TSI school, as well as Westbrook Park Elementary School, and one other elementary school, I believe, Mr. Salerno, correct?
Yes, Dr. Manfrey, Bywood Elementary School, Westbrook Park Elementary School.
But with that, I just wanted to introduce to you what this presentation is about. Really, the nuts and bolts of the presentation is going to be provided to you by our two wonderful principals who have worked so extraordinarily hard to get this presentation together and get their school improvement plans together. And we're extremely grateful to have two fantastic principals with you tonight to present their school improvement plans. So with that, I will turn it over to, I believe, Dr. Yerson will be taking the first slide.
Sure. The first slide, if you can go to the next slide, is just our agenda, an overview of the process. Dr. McCarthy and myself will go through the are the accomplishments at our individual schools, the challenges that we face, our individual steps that we're going to put into place, and the exit criteria given to us by the state. You can go to the next slide. We thought it was important for us to, let everyone know, what is ATSI. I think Dr. Manfrey did a great job of, putting that out there. And this is just the definition. So within our schools, we have a group of students that is not achieving where the state wants them and really where we want them to be as well. First thing we're going to go is to our accomplishments. So I'll just go through the accomplishments of Beverly Hills. The all-student group in English language arts and math are growing at a rate that exceeds the state standard for demonstrating growth this past year and on average over the last 3 years. Our students who take the Algebra Keystone really do a great job with that. They continuously score in the high 90 percentiles for proficient or advanced. Our counselors, through the leadership of Wendy Elgart, have made it a priority to ensure all of our students meet the career readiness benchmark, and last year we scored 100% on the career standards benchmark. A greater percentage of our students scored at least proficient in math and science on the PSSAs. We're proud of that, and the English language arts remained unchanged. So our multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS, we offer multiple reading and math intervention platforms to support our students. The behavioral supports that we supply to our students include mentoring, skills for success groups, small group homerooms, instruction in zones of regulation, check-ins, check-outs, tardy plans, mindfulness groups, and coaching. We meet weekly to discuss student data to determine if students are progressing with their intervention, and if any changes need to be made, both positive or to give students additional interventions. Our PBIS program is another accomplishment. We offer 5 lessons a week in character development. We have group and individual rewards for students that benefit or in various measures such as showing grit, being kind to other children and staff, and even making sure you're on time and come to school every day. So I'll pass it over to Dr. McCarthy for Charles Kelly.
Thank you, Dr. Yerstone. So items number 1 through 4 were taken directly from the Future Ready PA Index, as that is the basis as to how we were identified, and that is how we determine whether or not we are meeting our goals set forth in the exit criteria. So items number 1 and 2 we were extremely proud of. These were based on 2018-19 data, and we were very, very proud to see that we exceeded the state's growth in both English language arts and in mathematics. So in English language arts, we exceeded the state average. Ours was 79 and the state was 75. And really impressive, we were very proud with our growth in mathematics. Ours was 97 and the statewide average was 75.3. So we were very proud of those 2 specific accomplishments. Those 2 specific item points come directly from the state assessment measures component of the Future Ready PA Index. Item number 3 also comes from the Future Ready PA Index. This particular section comes from the college and career measures, which Dr. Yerstone mentioned a little bit on his slide. And we met the performance standard with a score of 92.5. And again, that was above the average for the state at 89.8. So we were very impressed with that. As well, Ms. Elgart worked very closely with our team as well as our school counselor in making sure that our students and our staff get all of the requirements and the artifacts uploaded into Career Zone, which is what we use at the elementary school level. Item number 4 also comes from the Future Ready PA Index, and this particular strand comes from the on-track measures, which is one of the components of the Future Ready Index. And in this particular strand, our all-student group met the goal for our percent of English language growth and attainment. Ours was 62.5 and the statewide average was 31.2. So we were very proud of those accomplishments. Number 5 does not directly come from the Future Ready PA Index, but we felt as though this was a huge part of our school climate and our school culture. Hopefully, if you've ever come into Charles Kelly, you can just gain a sense that it's a very special, unique place. And we really believe that that's what sets us apart, is our school climate and our school culture. And directly correlated to that, we believe, is the PBIS program that we have in place. Last year, if you recall, during one of the board presentations, we had presented that we were recognized for implementing with fidelity at the Tier 1 level, and we received a banner for that. And actually, the week before we had to go out on a closure, we were informed that we also received Tier 2 recognition. So we are implementing Tier 2 with fidelity through the PBIS model. So we were very excited as that accomplishment as well. So I'm going to move it on to Dr. Yerstone for the next slide.
Thank you. So the next slide, we'll talk about the challenges that we're facing. And these challenges, in this instance, are going to be, they were provided to us from the state. They gave us an exit criteria, which we'll show you guys at the end. And we know this, our achievement in English language arts and math, we need to improve that. We need to get our kids all on to be proficient in grade level. We're doing a great job of growing our students, but we have to, continue to push for achievement. In particular, our scores for our Black students fell below the state designated threshold for combined ELA and math scores. And that's, one of the primary reasons that we are considered an ATSI school. Our regular attendance rate also needs to improve. Please don't confuse this with daily attendance rate. So what regular attendance means, it's pretty much chronic absenteeism. So how the state calculates this is if students who are in the school for half of the year, if you're enrolled in the school for 90 days, you are a part of this calculation. If, let's say, you were enrolled in school for 180 days and you missed 10 days of school, you would count just for 1 in the numerator of this calculation, which you would be like a positive 1. If you missed 19 days of school, greater than 10%, you would not count in the numerator. You would only count in the denominator. So the first student that I gave an example of would count 1 in the numerator and 1 in the denominator. The second student that missed 19 days or more than 10% of the school year would only count in the denominator. And then students who, only enrolled for 60 days in our school, and let's say they were in school for 60 days, they wouldn't count at all. So this is definitely not daily attendance. This is, the students who are, enrolled for at least 50% of the time and, either are 10% or more absent or less. And that's how this regular attendance rate is created. We need to do a better job of working with our chronically absent students to help them get into our buildings. And then the last challenge that we're facing, according to this, is the English language proficiency for our Black EL students. So those students, we need to improve their scores on the access test, which is a test that English learners take each February. And, we have to get those scores up, and we're working on some methods to do that. And we'll talk about those in the action steps. Dr. McCarthy?
Thank you. So the challenges listed here, one of the things just to keep in mind that's challenging, I think, for our staff and for me as the principal of Charles Kelly is that although we shared with you our highlights and our accomplishments and our success of exceeding the statewide average in growth for both ELA and mathematics, the growth rate is not a factor in determining where are we in meeting the goals set forth in the exit criteria. The only thing that is identified is the proficiency for ELA and math and our regular attendance. So growth is not a factor. We would have liked for growth to be specific, but it was not. So the challenges specific to Charles Kelly is achievement in ELA for our identified student group, which is our Black student group. Again, that is terminology coming right from PDE. So our baseline data in 2018 was 27.6. That's what it was all based on. That's how they came up with the designation of an ATSI for our school. And for the 18-19 school year, we did increase. We did get to 31%. However, that was below the state average of 62.1. So although we are making growth and we're making progress, they're looking at the actual proficiency percent, and we are not there. In our achievement in mathematics, our baseline for 2017-2018 was 12.1. We did increase 18-19 to 13.2. So again, we're seeing improvement. However, the statewide average was 45.2. So again, we're not where we need to be. Our regular attendance rate, this one is factored in from 15-16, 16-17 combination, and that was 74.4 was our baseline. And unfortunately, we dipped. We went to 74.2 last year. So a slight decrease, not an increase that we would have liked to have seen, where the statewide average was an 85.86. So those are our challenges. Those are the areas that we specifically created goals. So there's 3 challenges, and there are 3 specific goals that directly correlate to those challenges that are based on the data that is provided in the Future PA Index. That you will also see a little bit later on in the exit criteria on one of the slides towards the end. So the action steps that Dr. Yerstone and I will be going over really address the ways in which we are addressing the challenges based on the data that we have been given. Dr. Yerstone, I think you're up next.
Right, so here are our action steps for Beverly Hills. I discussed earlier in the presentation about our supports that we're providing for students. We continue to modify those every year, and this year the board just recently approved the SOAR math program for our math intervention, and we will be giving additional one-to-one supports for students who need the highest level of behavioral supports in our building. We work to make sure our students have as many opportunities as possible, going to prioritize relationships, to build relationships with adults in our building. We make sure that our students are taught at some point during the day by their homeroom teacher. We continue to increase the number of teachers who are looping with their students. This is having the same teacher for consecutive years. Another thing we do to try to prioritize relationships is each November we create a document that has a list of all of our students' names in the left-hand column and every staff member across the top. And our staff goes through and labels each child a 1, 2, or 3 on how well they know the child. A 1 represents that you know the child's name but don't really know anything else about them. A 2 is you know the child's name and you can tell a few things about them. And then a 3 would be that you have a really strong relationship with the child. We then calculate those scores for every individual child in our building, and we send out an email to our staff on students with low scores. And we consider that if you only have a 1, even if it's by 10 teachers, and your score is 1 for all of those 10 teachers, we consider that a low score. And then we work to build relationships more so with those children. We have the HMH ELA curriculum coming to the middle schools, along with the SOAR math intervention program. We're looking, as we did this last year, was the first year in our reading interventions, that we incorporated a writing component, specific intervention for writing within those reading interventions. We'll continue with the learning targets and protocols, and we'll try to expand that. Last year, or the 1920 school year, Candy McKay and Associates provided training for our language arts and science teachers. We will continue to try to build that program within the staff that we currently have to continue to have all of our teachers implement learning targets and protocols. Our staff work with our students. We have specific goal-setting lessons that we do through our PBIS model. And then, we're really working to support our teaching and non-teaching staff. We provide our teaching staff with the opportunity for other teachers to come into their classrooms to provide them feedback on instruction, how to build relationships with students and classroom management. The next slide talks about restorative practices, trauma-informed educational practices. We're giving teachers, we're providing teachers with trauma tools for their classrooms, such as fidgets, creating calming corners, rocking chairs, bouncy seats, standing desks, so students can have, additional outlets. If you can't sit down and do your work, there's opportunities to potentially stand up and have a standing desk in the classroom, where if you need a couple minutes to calm down, there's a calming corner. So we're working to implement more and more of those throughout our building. Deep equity, that we're having those professional developments. We're trying to incorporate those into our daily practices. We have opportunities for our English learner teachers to push into some classes. We try to really keep those class sizes for those EL students in their language arts and reading interventions that are taught by the EL teachers. We try to keep those classes small. We create student attendance improvement plans with our students and hopefully their families. We invite families in weekly to create student attendance improvement plans for students who are struggling in that area. We meet weekly to talk about student attendance, to identify students who potentially should have an improvement plan in the area of attendance. And we also will discuss how we can, best serve those students. We also work with child guidance and families to try to get families hooked up with child guidance if truancy is an issue. And then, we also have our PBIS model that rewards students we talked about briefly. And now, Dr. McCarty, the exit criteria. So this is what we alluded to earlier. And as you can see in this document, our targeted group, if you look right above the table, it says, it uses the term black, and that's what the Pennsylvania Department of Education focused on for our area of improvement. You can see that the baseline performance for English language arts proficiency for our black students was almost 31%, and for our math students was at 6%. And the state gives us annual increase targets. So you can see that, this year the state wanted us to improve by 3.1% for the PSSA ELA for black students, for math by 4%. The English language proficiency document is an error. We haven't received the updated document. It shouldn't be a 20.5% increase. That's actually supposed to be the baseline performance. And then we have those consecutive increases. So if you look into the Beverly Hills document, the ATSI school improvement document, you'll see that the goals are taken directly based on this information from the exit criteria. So our goal for achievement at the end of the 21 school year for next year would be the baseline score plus each targeted annual increase. So we would add, 6.2 to the baseline of 30.7, and we would, our goal is to get to 36.9, and it's the same across the board with all of these goals. And to the next slide, please.
Thank you, Dr. Stone. So obviously we went over the 3 areas that we need to work on at Charles Kelly, and you may be thinking, well, how are they going to go about doing that? And that's really the whole thrust of the plan, and really taking a look at the goals that will be used to address those particular areas in need, and then action steps. How are we going to go about implementing the goals and following them? So some of these things are things that we started last year, but obviously, because we are an ATSI school, you know, the whole purpose of it is the additional targeted support. So we had to wrap our heads around and think about the 3 areas that we need to improve upon. What are additional targeted supports? What are additional things that we can do that maybe we haven't done or do them a little bit differently to help in those 3 specific areas with our identified student groups? So specifically, last year was our first year working with the McKay Consulting Group, and it was a phenomenal partnership. The staff members really enjoyed it, and the students obviously showed a lot of growth in both ELA and mathematics. So we're going to continue with our utilization of learning targets in the classroom. Last year, it was specifically focused on reading and ELA. This year, it's going to be a combination of ELA and mathematics. We're also going to continue with our student engagement assessment practices. If you're questioning what are student engagement assessment practices, something such as back-to-back, face-to-face, take a stand, quiz tree, these are all different types of student engagement assessment practices that our teachers work tirelessly with the McKay Consulting Group and are incorporating them into the classrooms. Again, last year the focus was specifically on ELA. This year it will be on both ELA and math. We are going to continue with our individual student data binders. I know that when Mr. Brown and Mrs. Curry and Dr. Taylor at the time were in attendance for the PSDA conference, that was a large part of what we presented was our individual student data binders, where students themselves are taking ownership of their learning and are progress monitoring their individual goals that are based on data. So we're going to continue with that as well through with ELA and mathematics. We're really excited for the opportunity to have an additional layer of professional development for our teachers as we roll out a new math program with the Envisions 2.0. We're really excited to be working with Tina Fulgram again and providing our teachers some best practices in math instruction as we roll out Envisions. The next slide, please. And we're going to continue with our faculty meetings, focusing on trauma-informed care and restorative practices, and our deep equity work that we're doing in conjunction with Dr. Council and his team. So we're going to continue that work and have some of those courageous conversations during our faculty meetings. We also, like Beverly Hills, institute the student attendance improvement plan for those students who are habitually absent. We're taking a look at, you know, what are the factors that play into that and how can we best support them. And in conjunction with our PBIS program, of course, we have to recognize those students that do have perfect attendance or do have, you know, attendance that is moving in the right direction. So we want to recognize those students and celebrate them in those successes through our PBIS plan. The next slide, please. So Brian touched upon, or Dr. Stone touched upon a little bit about his specific exit criteria, and this is Charles Kelly's specific exit criteria. And just a couple of things that I want to point out to you. So if you notice, the baseline data is there, and I went over with you that was based on the 17-18 data. The first year that they were really going to take a look to see the, you know, where are we in meeting our exit criteria percentages was this school year. It was the 2019-2020 school year. So obviously that did not happen because, as I had said earlier, with the Future Ready PA Index, the state assessment measures are a component of that, as well as the PSSAs and the PVAS. So not having that, we don't have that data that's going to be available to us. Interestingly enough, what we have been shared with the IU is that the percentage increase is still going to remain in effect. So although our students did not take any of the state assessment measures for the 2019-2020 school year, and if for some reason everything is fine and they take them in the 2020-2021 school year, they still have to increase in an annual percent as listed on the spreadsheet. So they still have to increase 2.4 every year. So the baseline data of 27.6, although we didn't take it this year, the expectation would be that we would be at 32.4 at the end of next year. So even though we didn't take the assessments this year, they're still expecting us to reach that criteria by the end of next school year. For our math proficiency, we would still be expected to reach 18.5% proficient by the end of the 2021 school year, the 2020-2021 school year. And our regular attendance rate, we would still be expected to reach 78.6. So, you know, from the state's point of view, they're not looking at it as though you didn't take the assessments this year. We're still held accountable in meeting the increases as listed in our exit criteria. And I think at this time, Mr. Salerno is going to take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. McCarthy and Dr. Uderstone. Great job with the presentation. I think it's also important to note, as Dr. McCarthy mentioned, obviously our closure, the mandatory school closure, has definitely impacted things. For example, the third and fourth quarter reporting out requirements for our ATSI schools in Beverly Hills and Charles Kelly were both waived. So there was much confusion throughout the county and across the state. We've been in multiple conversations and meetings with PDE and the local IU regarding the ATSI designation and the requirement to still complete and submit a plan, especially because there was the requirement to report out on the third and fourth quarter was waived. Some schools within the county actually expressed a desire to not to submit a plan at all. Obviously, they have been spinning their tires, working very hard with the plans for the school closure and beyond. But I'm really proud of the work that Dr. Uderstone and his team and Dr. McCarthy and her team were able to pull off. With a lot of confusion at the state and local IU level. They did their very best to support us. But as you can imagine, with all of this, there was a lot of confusion. That being said, as Mr. Marshallek mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, June 16th, at that special voting meeting, we are going to be asking for the board's approval to move the plan forward to the local intermediate unit so the executive director can sign, and then we can send it off to PDE. In addition to that, I think it's important to note that last week both plans were made public on the school's website. So under the principal page, both of the plans have been updated, even though it's not required for a public review, just to make sure that we are posting it up there prior to submission, as we have done in the past. So at this time, we're going to open it up for any questions from the board.
This is Rachel Mitchell. I just wanted to thank Dr. Uderstone and Dr. McCarthy for their extensive presentations and your really hard work at both schools. But if you could just go over, I'm not sure if Dan or Frank could do this, and I did lose sound briefly, so I apologize if you already went over this. Could you just talk about the ethnic subgroups, because I know that some board members probably have some questions about that.
Sure, Frank and Greg, I'm sure Tim Lambert is involved in this. One of you guys can jump in after I go through this. I understand there's some questions and concerns, so I'll try to be brief in this history review of how this has been established. So the federal and state governments have decided to hold school districts accountable. So they do this by holding us accountable to specific subgroups. While we've moved our way out of No Child Left Behind and what was called at one time adequate yearly progress, what many agreed on was the idea that there should be subgroups, federally designated and state designated subgroups that were required to report out on every single year. Historically, under what was called making adequate yearly progress under No Child Left Behind, Upper Darby School District was an example of a school district that always had a subgroup. In fact, we had a subgroup for just about every single subgroup, where other school communities did not have the same types of subgroups. So let me give you a local example going back in time. At one time, Beverly Hills Middle School had 33 different subgroups, which is one of the highest number of subgroups you can have in reporting out both state and federally in order to make what at the time was called adequate yearly progress. Drexel Hill Middle School had between 25 and 26. Aronimink Elementary School had fewer than 10, maybe 9 maximum. Most of our elementary schools had about 25. The more subgroups you had, the harder it would become to make adequate yearly progress or meet the standards under No Child Left Behind. So for years, Beverly Hills Middle School would get 32 out of 33 subgroups to make adequate yearly progress. I used to rail away at this at meetings when I was the assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and talk about how unfair it was. That at the time under AYP, the subgroups were, as I've provided the board, one category, Black African American is the same category. American Indian or Alaska Native is one category or subgroup. Asian or Pacific Islander is another subgroup. Hispanic, a subgroup, or white, a subgroup. At the time under AYP, if you had 40 students that were either white, Black or African American, American Indian or Alaska Native, that made up a specific subgroup. That was also designated at the time based on registration, based on how we collected this data that we're required to under the Pennsylvania Information Management System known as PIMS. We're required to collect this information and to report these subgroups out. Under AYP, it went from 40 to then when we went to, I'm going to date myself history, we moved out of No Child Left Behind in 2014 because they realized that there was no way 100% of all student subgroups would make adequate yearly progress. Why? You could be a student who was Caucasian, white, you could be special education, you could be economically disadvantaged, and you could fit into 3 different categories. So under No Child Left Behind, you counted 3 different times against a school district. These federal requirements remain. As we move from 2014 to where we are now in 2020, they've actually added more. They've added foster, I believe, homeless, as well as attendance as categories and subgroups that if you have students that make up 20 in those particular areas, we're obligated to report out that data and obligated to make progress. It just so happens in Upper Darby School District that our Black or African American, the same subgroup as it's reported out state and federally, are areas where we need to make progress, we need to see growth. Special education being another area related to discipline where we need to see make progress in this current existing system. So as you'll recall, over the last couple of years, I will still say there's an over-reliance on data, an over-reliance on data related in particular to students in poverty or students in school districts that are similar to ours. You will note that school districts that are similarly demographically to our school district, and by the way, poverty is probably the higher indicator than race, in my opinion, of success. And that's the reason why we're in the categories that we are. This is no different than terminology, in my opinion, back in the day of being called a corrective action school. They've just changed it, and it's more granular for school districts like ours. I would also point out that what Dr. Yerson and Dr. McCarthy-Frick are pointing out is the percentages they're asking us to move over a period of time with different cohorts of students. That's important to point out as well, that given our transient nature, we're having more students coming in and students leaving, and we're still obligated to increase our percentage of achievement every single year based on what the state has established. So hopefully, Ms. Mitchell, that provides a little bit of the background that these subgroups and these categories are established by the federal and state governments.
Thank you. I believe Ms. Curry has a comment.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Thank you, Dr. Yerson and Dr. McCarthy. I really appreciate the presentation. I just felt like it was very important that be broken down, Dr. McGarry, particularly for the public, so that they could understand the demographics. When I was looking at the slides, I felt like the area of Black didn't really necessarily give the full differential of what it looked like. And just a side comment, I feel like, again, this puts our school district in a bit of a disadvantage because of the amount of students that we have that sometimes move mid-year, and it puts pressure. And so I just wanted just some clarity on it. So I really do appreciate you giving the detail. Because we do have a highly diverse schools in our district, that it's important to understand when we are making reference to a particular race for data, but I do understand that it's state and federal. So I do appreciate you giving that clarity for the public. Thank you.
And Gina, Ms. Curry, and Ms. Mitchell, and members of the board, again, I want to compliment what Frank Salerno, Director of Elementary School, Dr. Manfred, Director of Secondary School, Ms. Kelly, our Curriculum Director, and the two principals that are on the call today, and this board. In order for us to make the progress we should make, and I mean we should make with our students in our schools, our facilities have to improve, and we've got to get back to providing the right resources, as I know this board's committed to doing, with our elementary schools and our middle schools. I did send a comment to Frank, Greg, and Christine that I think it's important that people see the bigger picture. I know our board sees it, and Gina, I appreciate you pointing it out. There's a bigger picture here and I want to reiterate this, to the point that Ms. Mitchell got involved in coming to board meetings when the stimulus money ran out, and I know Mr. Warsavage attended meetings at that time too, as I'm sure some of you else did. 96% of the subgroups 96% of the subgroups in the Upper Darby School District were making adequate yearly progress. So we are proof, I think this is to Ms. Curry's point, that when the schools are funded the right way, people and leaders such as Dr. Yerson, Dr. McCarthy-Frick, Dr. Manfrey, Mr. Salerno, good things happen here. It's when those resources are removed and you have fewer than 3 reading teachers, specialists for over 600 elementary school students, that it becomes insurmountable to make that happen. So we're trying to continue to educate everyone on this very complicated information because it's not easy to follow or figure out the changes from AYP to where we are today with ESSA and all these acronyms in public education. It's so confusing, it's so complicated to keep track of it. All I can say is that we have a little bit of every type of obstacle in our way, but we have wonderful kids in a very diverse community, and our job is to advocate for them, to fight for them, to give them the best education that I know this board and this administration wants to have happen. And we're making positive inroads. But every time there is a crisis or there's a lack of will from beyond our school district boundaries to support public education, the achievement and the data will look bleak, and we need to continue to advocate for that. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Gina.
Thank you again, Dr. McGarry, and thank you, Ms. Curry. Are there any other comments or questions from board members on the first agenda item? Okay, seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation, and we'll look forward to hearing another update. The next agenda item, please, Mr. Marshallak, delayed school start times for adolescents.
Yes, so tonight we have the spring update for the delayed school start times for adolescents. And what I'll do tonight is I'll go through a quick review of the options and some of the survey results and feedback that we received from our community and our parents and students, and then go through our next steps where we're going to take it from here. So we conducted a survey during the month of February and March, and we had over almost 500 responses for each of our groups: the parent group, student group, and staff groups. We feel we have a pretty good smattering of data to share with you tonight, and some highlights and some consistent themes from the survey results and the community feedback as well. Just quickly go through, and what I did, well, on each slide you'll see the option and then on the right-hand side of each option is the estimated costs, whether it's reoccurring and non-reoccurring costs. What I also broke down underneath each option was the percentage of the responses who looked at this option as their favorite or the most favorable option that they would like to see happen. Just rather than having a graphic representation of this, you can see each option broken down and the percentage of the response from each group and what they preferred. So as a review, option 1 was reducing our current high school schedule down to 24 blocks and a 4-block day, which would allow our students to come in at 8:30, high school students at 8:30, leave at 3:01, have some impact on our middle schools, but there would be a plan A and a plan B, depending upon we thought would help us out with the cost. Plan A was having elementary schools come in at 8 o'clock, and plan B or part B was coming in at 7:45 our elementary schools. So you can see the costs associated with both options. It really didn't change a whole lot with option A and option B. You can see the response from our parents, community, and our staff. More people chose option A over option B. Option 2 is the Block 1 cyber course. And again, no change to the current credits or scheduling, other than every student at Upper Darby High School will be committed to taking a cyber course during Block 1 here at the high school, which would allow students to physically come in later to the building. If they want to do their cyber option early in with their morning people, they could do it. Otherwise, they could do it at a later time during the day when they were more awake, and again, with the rhythm of their sleep patterns, they could do the work later on at night. Again, no change at our elementary and middle schools. You have some costs associated with transportation and technology as well for this option. There's recurring costs and non-recurring costs. And you can see the percentage underneath. The parent response was 10.7%. Student response, slightly higher, 16.3%. And our staff, 16.5%. And our staff response was 7.9%. But again, as you see through both options 1 and 2, there's a significant cost associated with both of these options. You'll see that threaded through in the pattern through the rest of our options that we chose as well. So option 3 and option 4 are similar, only in the sense that we are reducing or maintaining, the 5-block model here at Upper Darby High School. Option 3, we'll be having our students come in at 8:30, leaving at 3:01. No change to our other levels of our schools. However, the blocks will be reduced to 63 minutes per instructional block, as opposed to the normal 79-minute right now, what we have going on. You can see the cost associated with option 3. Option 4, again, 5 blocks, but reducing the time to 71 minutes per instructional block. The difference here is the high school students will come in at 8 in the morning as opposed to 8:30. So again, not following the recommendations by the sleep report that was published earlier this past fall, but it was something later than we have right now. Again, no change at our middle schools or elementary school. Still, quite a cost associated with both these. However, this option 4, seemed to have the highest percentage all around of our parent and our student and our staff response. Option 5 was to delay all 3 levels, high school, middle school, and elementary school, by 1 hour. We suggested this as a kind of point of a measurement to see what would it look like in terms of transportation costs. However, there still would be a significant cost to this if we pushed everything back 1 hour. You can see it was not a very favorable response or an option to many of our stakeholders. Again, option 6 is a commitment to the full facilities plan. Again, right now it's unknown in terms of what the cost would be associated with this, because we don't know what busking is going to look like. If we had more students going to their home schools and their neighborhood schools, they get to walk to those elementary or middle schools. But again, the goal will be to keep those students in our secondary schools, middle school and high school, starting school at 8:30. That'll be the goal start time. And you can see very, very low response to this option as well. And again, as you see the pattern through all the estimated costs. So, my recommendation at this point in time to the board is that we put this on hold for at least the duration of next school year. Continue to look at it and review it, and maybe refine our options that were the most favorable. And review it again at some point when things are more certain for the school district and the Commonwealth in terms of budget considerations, scheduling, and what school will look like for our students come next school year. So that's all I have for the presentation. Do you have any questions from any board members at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Marshallak, for the extensive presentation. Ms. Buford, are there any comments or questions from board members?
We have a comment from Ms. Curry.
Hey, Ms. Curry.
Thank you, Co-Chair.
We're not hearing Ms. Curry. Can we go to Mr. Neal while we work with Ms. Curry's sound?
This is David Neal. Thank you, Mr. Marshallak, for presenting that. I was hoping you would find an option that would save the district a couple $1 million, but it didn't look like that was one of the options. But I just, there's so many, what if scenarios that are involved in a time change. And one of that is after school curricular activities, including sports, which our athletes are involved in many different events that involve other school districts. And those times are typically, right after when school ends and the transportation has to go over. So they typically leave school early now. And, some of the time changes that I've seen, especially at the high school level, is, they would be missing a significant amount of school time due to athletic events or, speech and debate meet somewhere outside the vicinity of our local neighborhood. So I think that has to be considered when we take a look at this. I know a lot of community members with childcare before and after school. A lot of high school students will be going to their elementary schools to pick up their little brother and sister. So I think, in my opinion, I definitely would love to hold off on this, at least for the next school year, until we have more information. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. I know that Ms. Curry is having some sound trouble. I don't know. Gina, did you want to try one more time?
Yeah, I'm not sure why you all can hear me. That was weird. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted to say thank you to Mr. Marshallak for the intensive amount of work that was put in. That I think it's out again.
Ms. Curry, would you mind?
We can hear you.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
go ahead.
I think it's a good idea to hold off and just to let the public know that some of the other school districts that are under Senator Carney's office are also talking about this study. So it is definitely going across the area, and it is a big deal at this time. Thank you. That's all I had to say. I hope you can hear me.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Curry. That's true. The adolescent sleep time study that was posted on our website does go over some of the challenges that Mr. Neal was discussing. And I know that we've looked at it quite closely, and I'm hoping that the respondents had also looked into it. So I appreciate that. Is there any other comments from the board, Ms. Buford?
That was the last comment for the board.
Okay. So at this time, we are taking public comments. You can email it in, committee questions. And Dr. McGarry, could you just state the phone number one more time, and then we'll do a nice pause to make sure there's no additional questions. I don't know if there are any public comments at this time.
At this time, there are no public comments, but if you are a member of the public and like to send a comment, you can send it one of two ways. One, to committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org. Please provide your name and address and the agenda item you would like to provide a comment or question, as well as 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Again, please leave your name and your address and the agenda item you'd like to comment or leave a question for, and we will address them this evening. Again, committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org or 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Thank you.
So we'll just give it just a few moments, but while we're waiting to see if any others come in, I just want to give it a couple minutes because I know that people might be taking their time to, it was sort of finished sort of abruptly. So all of the information that you saw tonight is available on board docs. which is listed on our website under the school board tab. So if you need to look back at this for future reference, or if you have any additional questions, even after the meeting, you can still send your questions to committeequestions@upperdarbysd.org. Now I'll just ask one more time if there's any more, if there are any public comments.
While we're waiting, Ms. Mitchell, Dr. McGarry would like to make a comment.
Oh, great.
I just wanted to reiterate, I believe what Mr. Brown, he participated this past month in a town hall conversation organized, I believe, by Senator Kearney to Ms. Curry's point. And during that conversation, as Ms. Curry pointed out, there's been much discussion, not only by Senator Kearney, but by others about transportation. So I believe, as Ms. Curry pointed out, there might be even more of a smart reason to pause. As Mr. Brown, you participated in that conversation. There seems to be some movement regarding transportation costs. One of them, reducing our responsibility to transport students up to 10 miles and limiting that to 5 miles is one consideration that's up for discussion. There's other considerations from some school districts that transportation would either be contracted out or reduced, and obviously this would require a solicitor to look at it. But also reducing transportation to only students who have transportation requirements in their IEP, and that we would not be providing transportation to any other students. Transportation, I think, to Ms. Curry's and Mr. Brown, you participated in this conversation, is one of those up-and-coming areas that school districts will be looking to potentially reduce or find ways to reduce the cost when you have considerations such as COVID-19 or when you have considerations such as a sleep study. When those costs become insurmountable, it sounds like there's a lot of momentum moving in a direction to free up school districts' responsibilities to pay and provide transportation.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry.
I do have a comment. This is
Oh, okay, great.
This is President Brown. I just wanted to say to Mr. Marshlack, thank you for your work on this. I do know that your comprehensive review of this really takes into consideration our unique needs in Upper Darby. Other districts are looking at it as well, and it's not really one size fit all when it comes to the sleep study or making any modifications to it. So we're looking at how we operate and what's best for our students and what's best for our community, and not what's best for like Delaware County as a whole or other school districts. We're looking at our unique situation. So thank you for that. Thank you.
And Ms. Curry, just wanted to reiterate that it's actually up for it's a PSBA platform topic in August, transportation and how it can be addressed.
Great. Thank you so much for all of those updates. This is the last call if there's any public comment that already came in. I gave it a few moments.
There are no public comments at this time.
Okay, so we really only have one agenda item tonight, Mr. Marshalak, that requires board action, and that's the ATSI school level plan. So is the board comfortable with moving those plans forward tonight?
Yes.
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 Is there any board members that aren't ready to move it forward? Okay, seeing none. So we'll move that forward for board action. I believe that's next week already.
I'm sorry, Ms. Mitchell, just to clarify, this will not be until June 16th for a special voting meeting.
16th.
Correct.
Okay, great. So the second agenda item was the delayed school start, and it was just informational, so we aren't considering that to move forward tonight. So with that being said, there's a motion in order for adjournment.
David Neal, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Great job, Ed.